Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei. Back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Melina? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Father. Such a simple word. Morgoth didn't think himself worthy of such. A simple dalliance with an unknown woman had led to this. To this babe wrapped in dirty swaddling cloth, even now nestled in his arms. An Omen, tried and true. Twin horns on his forehead, but nowhere else. The baby screamed, wailing in a loud, lusty cry. Perhaps at the unfairness of it all, of his circumstances, of his BRTHs, of the mother he'd never know. She'd died in childbirth. The boy would never know her. He felt a fresh pang of guilt for that. The sewers held life, meager though it was. Even an Omen had their needs. It had been a fleeting encounter, a moment of passion, of weakness, that had led to this. 9 months later, and he still hadn't learned to know her name. Now he never would. Such was the way of things underground. Those thrown into the sewers as babes often came without names. Most discarded them, as they did their lives. Sometimes they chose new ones. Sometimes they didn't. He and his brother were the exceptions to this strange tradition. They'd known their names from the beginning, if only because of their lineage. Ah, but a son, the thought made his arms tighten around the squalling little bundle. Perhaps the boy would yet choose a name for himself in time. If he lived. Would he? The thought was a knife in his chest. Such a little life, a little light, easily snuffed out. To grow old down here was not a kindness. Not by any means. It would be mercy to kill him. And still the lad cried. Morgoth scowled. Hush, boy. Incredibly, the mewling infant listened. He looked up at him with those blue eyes, and he seemed to know, to understand the words. There was an ancient wisdom behind his gaze, that of a life already lived. He wasn't sure what made him think of such. He looked, and something in the boy spoke to him. There was power in him. Morgoth could sense it, having always been sensitive to such things. There was strength here, might, to uproot the old ways and away with the golden order in its entirety. And, despite all it had done unto him and his, Morgoth remained a loyal follower of the order. Not just a mercy to kill the boy then, but perhaps a necessity, cruel though it may be. Queen Marika Mother would never suffer such a threat to her rule. She would not simply kill this boy. The greater will would never allow it. That thing would break him. Take him apart, see what it was that gave him this power. He would die a dozen deaths, yet still live. Death would be release, even if it pained him to do so. His right arm rose, conjured a dagger of gold light to his palm, held it high. Now, the boy kept staring at him, watching, waiting. He didn't make a sound. Morgoth's arm trembled, and his will went with it. Forgive me. It would be quick, painless, even a good death. Yet he couldn't bring himself to bring his arm down. He should. He must. His every instinct was screaming at him, howling for him to end the boy. Such a child could not be allowed to flourish. He knew that. Understood it. So why couldn't he move? 5 firm fingers wrapped around his wrist before he could find his resolve. "Oh, brother." The Omen craned his neck back to regard the speaker. He knew that voice, loathed and loved it in equal measure. Only one would dare touch him so. "What are you playing at, Mog? Hear me for but a moment." His twin grinned at him, still gripping his wrist. Let the boy live. In the end, Morgoth could not deny his brother a chance to speak. Not even now. For all his flaws, they were still kin. They had been cast down into the sewers together, survived together, grown strong together. But that was where their similarities ended. Mog reveled in his curse, delighted in the power he'd been granted, while Morgoth wished for nothing more than a cure. His brother was quick with his silver tongue, and he, but a blunt instrument. His twin craved change while Morgoth sought to remain in the here and now. Where you see a threat, I see potential. Mog's voice was a low purr. You know not what you do. Morgoth looked back to the squalling infant. T would be a mercy to end him now, I say. Mog disagreed with a shake of his horned head. It would be cruel. Morgoth scoffed. And who are you to speak of cruelty, brother? You and your formless mother delight in such debauchery. Speak ill of my goddess if you wish. I make no excuses. His darker half favored him with a selfsame smile and a shrug. Nor have I ever pretended to be anything other than what I am, unlike you. So they were circling back to this. Where they? I know what I am. What you are. The order was right to condemn us for our cursed BLD. We are forsaken, the both of us. We deserve to rot down here, forgotten with the rest. His twin FL seek at his fangs in admonishment. And you would condemn your son, your own flesh and BLD, to such a fate? Their eyes locked. Morgott reached for his cane. Moog raised a hand. Scarlet light fled from his fingers. Rather than strike him, that thin tendril of crimson miasma wrapped itself around the boy in Morgott's arm. He jerked back, but it was too late, the damage done. As he looked on aghast, it coalesced into a three-pronged scarlet sigil upon the little lad's forehead. The baby giggled at it. Morgott rounded on him, teeth bared. "What have you done?" "I?" his twin scoffed. "I have done my duty as his uncle and granted him the blessing of the formless mother." Moog remained undaunted. "What have you given him save the promise of death?" His brother went a step further. "If you will not raise him, we shall." Morgott reared back with a growl, clutching the boy to his chest and recoiling at the very idea. A child raised by Moog. Unacceptable. Such would surely groan beyond his control and threaten the world above. The formless mother and the frenzied flame beneath her were not things to be trifled with. He imagined a boy commanding both, and the very thought left him shivering. Nay, it could not be allowed. He said as much. Unacceptable. Then rear him yourself, brother. Moog didn't touch his trident, but his gaze was sharper than steel. That is your only recourse. One way or another, I will see that boy survive. The formless mother has spoken to me. He has a purpose, a destiny. I will not let you deny him. He gripped his cane. I could kill you, and then him as well. You could try, Moog allowed, but you won't. You're not that cruel. Could he do this? Could he strike his own kin down in coldest of BLD? The realization struck him. He'd been about to do the same to this boy. His own son. A pudgy hand caught at his ruined cloak, patting his chest. How odd. It almost felt as if the little one were trying to comfort him. Nonsense. He was a baby. Whatever vision he might have seen of him was just that. A vision, wasn't it? The moment of madness passed. He is my son. I shall raise him as mine own. Mo's smile suggested he'd been angling for that all along. A wish choice. This boy may yet be our salvation. The FL seeker of dread stirred in Morgott's cold heart. Salvation. This boy might well be the ruin of all that their mother, now the babe's grandmother, aspired towards. That he was even entertaining this madness. And yet when he looked upon his boy, his heart thawed. Perhaps. Morgott stamped down on such thoughts. He would not fall prey to the flame of ambition. He would see this boy live, yes, but he would teach him to be humble. Good. He would not name him. Such would be for him to find. He was born in the mud. He would live in the mud. Just like them. Moog clapped his shoulder, startling him from his maudlin thoughts with merry laughter. Have some faith, brother. You've made the right choice. It is not the matter of faith that concerns me. Morgott sighed. It was a moment of weakness. Nothing more. That moment of weakness would change the world. But for better or worse, who could say? He knew what the boy was. An omen of change. The boy grew under his watchful eye, steadily and surely. With time came knowledge, but also sorrow. You have come far, my child. Naruto pursed his lips. As ever he twitched a little at the voice, if only because it wasn't the one he knew. He wished it were. Still, he appreciated the sentiment, misguided though it was. Not far enough, he muttered. Fair? A low, husky chuckle pervaded his thoughts. Always reaching for new heights, aren't we? He felt spectral fingers pat his hair, and the mark on his forehead pulsed a baleful red. 'Tis an admirable quality in one so young. Young, the formless mother said. Didn't feel like it. Naruto cast a baleful look at his trousers. The ragged black cloth was fraying at the edges, little more than rags. He'd need new clothes, soon. They barely fit him, and his tunic wasn't in much better shape. Here he was, already, 5 years old, and he was just growing 2 DMN fast. He'd have to scrounge up something else to wear soon. Dad wouldn't provide them. Not because he wouldn't, but rather because they lacked the resources. It didn't bother him. He'd begun with nothing once. He would do so again, if need be. He was no stranger to rebirth or reincarnation by this point. But even so, it pained him to know what he'd lost. Kurama was gone. Just thinking of the fox's absence pained him beyond words. In place of that snarky voice inside his head, only she remained, a gift from Uncle Moog. It just wasn't the same. He'd grown used to having the old fox around. Not just for his power, but his presence. His vast reserves lingered, even in this strange new life, as did the accumulated knowledge of his techniques. Yet he felt hollow. Inside, he still had full access to all his elemental combinations and acquired bloodlines. Boil, magnet, lava, and the like. Yet he would have gladly traded them in an instant to have them back. I understand. I am a poor substitute for such a creature. You truly miss him, don't you? Naruto pursed his lips and dared a nod. I do. Understandable. He was your friend. It is not weakness to shed tears for him. He sensed her lingering question, even if she didn't speak it. But you are still here, in this second life. Why is this true? If he really wanted to, could have killed himself and gone to where Kurama was, assuming the old fox was dead in the first place. But he hadn't now, had he? And he knew why. In good conscience he couldn't abandon this world, not when the people down here were suffering so. Ah. There the formless mother went, reading his mind again. You seek atonement. It felt strange having a goddess in his head, but at least she was good for conversation. That she could peer into his past so freely was frankly a little concerning, but only that. She had no more control over him than he did her. The fact that his legs were still folded beneath him, his eyes still screwed shut, was proof enough. Theirs was a symbiotic relationship, strange as it might sound. A chance to make amends, to do things better than he had in his first life. When he'd lost everything, everyone, all because of that wretched, nasty, vile Otsutsuki. Oops. He felt steam seething from his shoulders, caught the slip and reined it in, taking a deep breath to center himself. Don't lose control. He felt another spectral hand pat his shoulder. You did everything you could, Naruto. But he hadn't, had he? He should have kept up his training, not slacked off. Can you not, right now? I don't want to think about the past, as you wish. Another deep breath came and went, bringing him back to the center. The veins pulsing near his eyes receded as his temperature dropped. There, better. Meditation helped to center him these days. Calm. He was calm, centered, wholly at peace, or as much peace as one could be down here in the depths. He wouldn't let his anger get the better of him. He'd do things right this time. And when you are of age, his brow furrowed. He kept his eyes closed. Then I'll do something about this mess. He had to. He must. He couldn't bear to see the Omens living like this. That he was one of them in this cycle was of no consequences. He still would have sought their salvation, even if he were human. 5 years down here in the dark had shown him much. Too much. These people, his people, live in squalor, and for what? An accident of BRTH. They called it a curse, but in truth it was a blessing. Uncle Moog was right. Their world wouldn't change unless someone made it change. He'd show them. He would show them all. There were miles to go, and promises to keep. Very well. The goddess hummed in his head. I've been patient thus far. I can wait a little while longer. A rusty chuckle escaped him. You sound so certain. I've seen your memories, my champion. There is no one better suited to usher in a new age than thee. There it was again, the faint feeling of unseen arms embracing him as he continued his meditations. Likewise, I have already claimed ye. You are mine. You simply haven't realized it yet. Why me? Because you are more than a vessel. You were reborn into this world for a purpose, and thus embody change. My rivals have goals of their own, but their vessels are lacking. She sounded almost bitter about that. One seeks naught but chaos. Another craves order. One demands rot. Some wish the moon to reign. A few crave the return of dragons, and yet more seek the endless darkness of death. I aspire to greater things. A blonde brow rose, despite his shut eyes. And that is, she hummed happily, a new dynasty, ours. Cheeky goddess. His thoughts turned inward once more. In the absence of Kurama, he'd become more versatile, thrown himself into study, into learning every DMN thing he could. Some might say he was lesser than he was before. Quite untrue. He was more, somehow. His once tan skin was paler, not ghost white, but the shade of one who hadn't seen proper sunlight since his BRTH. His body, young though it was, brimmed with power and strength well beyond what a child of 5 should command. He rubbed his horns absently, grumbling a little as they pricked his fingers. Feel like a freaking Otsutsuki with these. A low chuckle. Perhaps you are, he he snarled. Don't say that. My apologies. He experienced a brief flash of someone. A pale, shapely woman with flowing dark hair and sad green eyes staring out at him from the void. I didn't intend to offend. I merely meant, just leave it. She did, and gradually, Naruto turned back to his thoughts. He pitied them. Not just the Omens, but everyone trapped in the underground. These sewers were no place to raise a family, yet what choice did they have? He'd seen others down here, other younger Omen who had chosen names for themselves in the absence of any true parent to raise. Titles like Maul or Razor, Savage and the like. Crude at best. It was all some of them had, their sole memory of sunlit land they would never see. There were ways out of course, but each was carefully guarded, and Morgott was ever watchful. Many descended, but none went above without his say-so. Strange folk snuck down to trade from time to time, of course. Odd fellows like Kale or Patches, those who knew hidden ways they were loath to reveal. Bit of an odd duck that last one, but not necessarily bad. His ear twitched suddenly. Faint shuffling footsteps reached him from a nearby tunnel. A blue eye creaked opened. What was this? A newcomer. Most were usually thrown down here as infants, but every now again, someone came. Down of their own volition, seeking asylum and bringing tales of the world above. Perhaps a pilgrim? The harsh stomp of heavy boots put paid to that thought, and a pained cry reverberated through the tunnel soon thereafter. Well, a newcomer and a hunter chasing them. In one day, seemed his fortunes had changed. Naruto righted himself and turned to face the mouth of the tunnel. All right, what do we have? A small figure shot down the ladder at speed, all but throwing themselves off in their haste to escape their pursuer. They saw him, and he saw them, caught a flash of white clothes and dark hair, wide yellow eyes. Then they were past him, hurtling deeper into the sewers. Something crashed down behind him, ignoring the ladder entirely. Naruto craned his neck back, saw the grinning mask, those twisted cleavers in hand, and knew what it was he faced. Omen killer? He'd seen Uncle Moog slaughter one once before. They were monsters in the shape of men, cold and unfeeling with no emotions. Tools pretending to be people. Which meant he needn't feel guilty for what he was about to do. A spark of excitement kindled in his chest as he stepped forward. A chance to test yourself. Show him. Show the world you are not to be trifled with. Yeah, I hear ya. A deep breath filled his lungs as he drew on the natural energy around him. There was so very little of it down here in the sewers. Enough for a minute at most. More than enough. His senses expanded, and for a moment he could see everything. Sense every being living down here, Omen, Siren, Albinoric and otherwise. His attention snapped back a moment later. Blue eyes stained a molten shade of gold, orange dust flecking his eyelids, lending them an eerie glow. Power surged through him, empowering his spindly frame. He reveled in it. Grinning, he stepped forward, exhaled and uttered a single word. Oi. The Omen killer might be mindless, but it wasn't stupid. It reacted to sound and noise. Heard his, turned away from its prey, and rounded on him in turn. He beckoned once. It leaped. Bloody thing was fast. Terribly so, well beyond what a normal human should be capable of. Many an Omen had already fallen to those cruel horned cleavers. Fortunately he was faster. Stronger, too. Its first strike went wide, missing him by a narrow margin. Don't. Suppose you be willing to back down. It swung at him with a wordless roar. Didn't think so. He swayed back with a lazy sigh, spine creaking as he let the twisted cleavers whistle past his head. Near miss. Not up to his old level by any means, but then again this body was that of a 5-year-old. Such discrepancies were to be expected. Pivoting on one heel, he smashed his heel again the monster's left knee, curious to see how his strength held up these days. Sure enough, the Omen killer's well-padded limb bent with an awful crack. It doubled over, howling in pain. He caught it by the mask and smashed it into the floor. Hairline fractures spread through the stone, widening into fissures now as he pushed down on the twisted creature. Not so fun when your prey can fight back, is it? A cleaver smashed into his side, only to be caught by a raging torrent of golden, spiky hair. Lion's Mane was a useful jutsu he'd seen Jiraiya use a time or two. Against foes like these, it was all but effortless. Nor did he stop there. In a matter of moments, he had the cruel creature ensnared. For a moment, a silver of a second, he caught a dull flicker of surprise gleaming through the Omen killer's mask. A faint spark of what was once humanity, but now little more than a living doll. Doubtless it hadn't expected such a technique. "That's right," whiskered Cheeks dimpled in a savage smile. "You've never met an Omen like me." This beast was pathetic. Or so he thought, until it spat fire in his face. The formless mother hissed in his head. Wretched thing. It didn't even tickle Naruto. Made him feel nice and toasty. Really? Gold eyes narrowed in mild exasperation. "Is that all you can do?" He leaned out the flames, utterly unscathed. "I expected more." The Omen killer snarled and swung at him with its remaining cleaver. No tact, no subtlety whatsoever. Only brute strength. Naruto reached up, then around as though swatting an errant fly. The cleaver settled snugly against his palm. Enough games. A simple squeeze shattered the weapon entirely, peppering him with jagged debris. Put these foolish ambitions to rest. The Omen killer gurgled in confusion, then pain as he snapped his head to the right. His jagged hair reacted accordingly, slamming his prey into the vaulted ceiling above. All that armor availed it naught. An audible crunch of broken bone reached his ears. He whipped his neck to the left, using his hair as one might a WHP. His prey caromed off a wall, now, followed by the floor, sealing again a wall once more, over and over, again and again in timely succession. Back and forth he flailed, almost dancing in place as his long locks thrashed the mindless brute every which way. Finally, he let it fall. Its broken body collapsed into pool of BLD. Now, he considered, what to do with you? Break him. Tear him apart. Someone's at SDST today. I still need his head for a trophy. I mind not oh. The Omen killer surged up and threw itself at them, clawing for their throat. Blood flames sparked in his grasp as the fingers of his right hand curled into a cruel claw. He held it for a moment, let it sizzle there a while as the man-beast blitzed him in mindless wrath. Counted to 3, now, waited until the very last moment, and flung the crimson cloud his way with a contemptuous FLCK of the wrist. A human foe or any rational being would have seen the incantation and dodged aside. Alas, an Omen killer wasn't human. The dumb brute blitzed right through it, fixated on him and nothing else. The spell ignited a moment later. Bathing the beast in bloody napalm, Naruto pivoted on one heel, let it stumble on past, then smashed a Rasengan into its back for good measure. A tortured wail filled his ears as it went down. No emotions didn't mean no pain. Heartless or not, the living bled like any other. It sank down onto Han's knees. Perfect. His left hand clenched and conjured a massive hammer forged from purest gold light. Morgoth's trademark, taught him only after much cajoling. Now that giant crusher swung down and splintered the beast's remaining knee. BLD flew across the air to spatter across his face. The bloody loss only strengthened him. His prey cried out. He hardened his heart to it. This thing wasn't human. It would have shown him no more mercy than he would have given it. Such was the way of the underground. Kill or be killed. Some might say it was cruel to torture someone in such a way. Naruto rather disagreed. In his eyes, there was nothing sweeter than tearing down those who sought to avail themselves of the weak, the cruel, the twisted, those who thrived on pain and torment. An Omen killer was just such a creature, a mindless weapon capable only of being aimed in a given direction, then let loose. Someone must have sent it down here. No matter, he'd find its MSTR and kill them, too. Might help to know their identity, though. He paused just short of killing it, grabbed it by the mask, hauled it upright. "Who sent you here?" it growled, and surprised him with garbled speech. "All omens must die." "I've heard that one before," he jostled it with a scowl. "Who sent you?" "All omens must die." Broken record, this one. Last chance. Tell me, and I'll grant you a peaceful death. All omens must die. In a fit of pique, Naruto yanked the mask off. The face beneath had him jerking back with a yelp. The creature was barely human at all anymore, all scarred skin, dead black eyes, and a thin slit for lips. He couldn't bear to look at it. All the while that twisted visage grinned at him, chanting those wretched words like a mantra. Die, die, die. The lunatic grinned at him, mad to the last. They'll all die, all of you will die, spittle frothed at the thing's mouth. Every last omen, even the women and children, all will die tilde, his eyes flashed. You first. The golden giant crusher screamed down in a circular swing. BLD spattered the floor. A head rolled. A body twitched once and fell still. Naruto planted his conjured hammer in the ground, took a breath to center himself, then bent to retrieve the man's fallen mask. A trophy, perhaps the first of many. Maybe living down here had made him cruel. Perhaps he'd always had this side of himself, and losing Kurama had simply sharpened it. Who could say? The formless mother prodded him. Don't forget the runaway, right? Naruto craned his neck, spied a trail of BLD leading away from the scene. Wasn't strong to find. He followed it, rounded the bend, and saw them. Oh! His heart twisted as he beheld the creature's victim at last. Found her curled up in a corner, bony, quivering knees tucked into her chest. A girl maybe 6 or 7 at a glance, clad in a torn white shift. Bloodied shoulders hunched down when he drew near, trying to make herself seem smaller somehow. Idly he noted a brilliant pair of bone-white horns upon her head, one to each side of her skull, curling through long dark hair toward her forehead before tapering off just above her eyes. And what strange eyes they were! Wide, gold, and slitted like those of a cat. So the girl was an Omen after all. Not surprising. Stay back, she bared her teeth at him in a snarl when he dared a single step forward. Don't come any closer, or I'll curse you. You're all right. He dispelled his hammer and held up a hand. That thing's not going to hurt you anymore? The girl looked past him, saw the corpse and the mask in his hand. You killed it? Yup. He smacked his lips, producing an audible pop. That a problem? No, her face creased in a murderous scowl. I hope it hurt. All right, that was an awful lot of anger to unpack there, but he knew better than to pry right now. Something told him the girl wouldn't take kindly to it just yet. Or asking after the wounds on her arms. She must have had horns there too, once upon a time. Poor thing. The pain she might be in. He dropped the mask and knelt before her, careful to keep his hands in full view at all times. What's your name? Name? The anger dulled for a moment. She shook her head. Don't have one. They never gave me a name. I ran down here. That thing chased me. You still haven't answered my question. His brow furrowed. Who's they? Her mouth sealed shut, refusing to answer. No dice. Well, if you need a name. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose and racked his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd named a newcomer, but he'd always been breathed when it came to stuff like this. It would have to be something short and succinct, easily remembered. Something simple, something that reminded him of his own name. Albedo, then, he declared, watching her jolt a little. Come with me, I'll take you somewhere safe. Why? She squinted up at him fearfully. Why help someone like me? Who are you? Naruto's lips parted in a small smile. He held a hand out. Omen of change. A girl? Naruto knew that tone. Yes, indeed, he knew it very well. He'd heard it many a time before, whenever he or another of the Omen children did something particularly bold or stupid and Morgoth took them to task. It was that same incredulous tone that told him this wouldn't be an easy argument. Cold golden eyes awaited his answer, and he knew at once he would have to fight for every inch of ground. His father was seldom driven by sentiment these days. It would be a worthy challenge. Why have you brought her to me, boy? Rather than retort, Naruto flung down the Omen killer's head. It struck the ground and bounced once, tumbled a bit, and came to rest at his sire's feet. Morgoth considered it with a keen eye, but made no move to rise from his throne. His sire lounged upon the crude chair before him, an awful ramshackle thing made of wood, bone, and rusty steel. He could feel the eyes of other Omen upon them, watching from the shadows, awaiting for his judgment. It wouldn't do to show weakness down here. Weakness meant death. Bah, the formless mother scoffed. You're the third strongest down here. With time and my guidance, you shall surpass them all. Fair enough. But he had a question to answer. Isn't it obvious? With one arm he kept Albedo behind him. With the other, he gestured to the court of the underground. I saved her from that thing. He had a contemptuous look to the Omen killer's mask. She has nowhere else to go. Someone scoffed in the shadows. Naruto never knew who. Is she even truly an Omen? Albedo bridled, golden eyes flashing with rare anger. I am. Aha! A grim smile wreathed Morgoth's countenance as he leaned forward on his throne. She speaks. Stop hiding those wings of yours, girl. It must be painful to tuck them in like that. Albedo squirmed and gave Naruto a fretful look, complying only at his nod. The back of her tunic bunched, then bulged. And then, feathers flew through the air. Dark and midnight black, her wings were unlike any Omens he'd seen. Large, heavy things of ebony down that circled round the girl's waist to protect her, They were lovely, if he was being honest. Someone called her a freak and flung a pebble her way. They paid dearly for it as she slapped it back with a hiss. Her would-be fell in a shower of BLD. No one said a word. Strength spoke in the underground. Naruto felt his respect for her creep higher. He wasn't sure whether she could use them to fly, not yet, but she could clearly move them. Interesting. Morgoth hummed, uncaring as the fool's body was dragged away. And your tail? Albedo's shameful expression said it all. Ah, cut off, then. A tremulous nod. Naruto stepped forth to defend her before father could press her further. She stays. Does she, now? Morgoth drew himself up to his full height, looming over them. You are bold indeed today, my son, to command me. Naruto didn't budge. Albedo squeaked and dove behind him, temper faltering. Even so, he stood his ground. He knew the old man would give in. He always did sooner or later. Sure enough, he plodded back to the throne. You shall see to her needs, I trust? He wrapped his cloak round him, turning to sit once more. I have not the time. It was as much an admission as he'd get from him. You shan't slack in your training, either. As if he would let him. Are we clear? Naruto nodded. I won't let you down. A rare spark of amusement gleamed in his gaze. See that you do not. He suspected Dad said the words for the benefit of the other Omens. Or maybe he was just grumpy today. BSTRD was DMN strong to read sometimes. Send her to your chambers. He FLC'd a gray-skinned arm her way in a negligent gesture. I care not what you do with her. With a grimace, he climbed to his feet. Come, it is time for your lessons. Naruto grimaced. Already? Oops. Shouldn't have did that. Mistakes were made. Morgoth granted him a grim grin. A large hand settled on his shoulder, steering him away. Greatness waits for no one, my heir. Morgoth watched his son train with a blade. This little lad, so smart, so clever, so quick with his silver tongue ... It was rare to see him falter in something. Finally, he sighed. Well, thou art of passing skill. Warrior BLD must truly run in thy veins. But that is not how you wield a sword. Poor fool was SWNGNG it around like a bat. He knew. Better than that. The boy perked up. Show me? Very well. Reincarnation SCK. Naruto knew he still had his skills, his memories, but not the body to wield them properly. Building himself up again would take time, effort, determination. Even so, he liked to think he was making progress. He'd torn that Omen killer apart. Surely that counted for something, right? Right? It did not. Today had made that terribly apparent. For all his other skills, he was PSS poor when it came to wielding a sword, and it showed. Morgoth seemed determined to beat the art of the blade into him come hell or high water. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. Today, he certainly had. In summary, Naruto's body ached. He had to drag himself along the wall just to reach his room. He'd never felt move alive. Morgoth was a harsh taskmaster, but when he taught well. You truly are a junkie when it comes to training. Maybe, he offered her a rueful smile. Can't wait to fall into bed. He found his chamber easily enough, signified by the faded red curtain drawn across it. He drew it aside and uttered a quick incantation, filling the room with light. His quarters were little more than a series of somewhat shallow alcoves in the wall, gaps in the granite he'd carved out with painstaking slowness, using nothing but his bare hands. Still, they were his, and he was proud of them. It had his meager belongings and trophies lined against one wall, a cot on the other, and a small table for eating or reading when the mood suited him. As for the privy well, best not speak of that. He found Albedo kneeling near the ladder on the dirty floor, still wearing her bloody rags. Welcome back, my MSTR. She bowed her head. Don't call me that. He frowned, an ugly realization dawning. Have you just been sitting there, all this time? A nod. Yes. It's been hours. I did not wish to move. Don't tell me you're comfortable like that. She nodded. Nothing more, nothing less, like she was some sort of broken doll. Was she still in shock? Did you at least draw a bath for yourself? Her brow furrowed in mild consternation. I do not know how. Naruto blew out a sigh and paced to the wall. Stand up. And don't kneel there. Floor's filthy. Albedo obeyed. He could feel her watching him. As he dragged out a copper basin and filled it with fresh water from several nearby vases. It proved the work of several minutes. Once that was done, he moved a hand forth. A snap of his fingers sparked fire in his palm, heating the tepid water to a comfortable temperature. He didn't miss the way her eyes widened on his hand. Flame incantations were supposedly blasphemous, or so Morgoth said. PSS on that. Easiest way to warm water. From there he went about fetching one of his spare tunics, an old gray thing, and a black pair of breeches besides. They would serve in place of her rags. He set them aside on a wooden stool and stepped back. Go ahead. He jerked his head toward the basin. I'll be in the other room. Should be some dry cloth on the rack over there. Dry yourself with that, wear the spare clothes, then find me when you're done. Albedo nodded once. He bolted before she could disrobe and considered he matter settled. Hopefully. Surely she could at least bathe her herself. A pleased hum filled his ears. You're concerned for her. I'm worried about her. He closed his eyes and shot the formless mother a mental glower. It's like I have to give her instructions just to live. Concerning, but not unexpected given what she went through. I'm sure the shock will pass. He set the Omen Killer's mask beside his other trophies, hallmarks of his time in the underground. Hopefully you're right. He'd deal with madness before, but if the surface could break a person that badly, he wasn't sure he ever wanted to see it. No, wait. He told a lie. Curiosity was tempered by concern, but now there was a burning need to know just what the surface world was like. From what little had to go on, it didn't sound a thing like the elemental nations. That was mildly concerning. What kind of civilization tore people up like that and cast them down here? The curtain was drawn aside, settling his thoughts. Albedo stood before by him, her hair damp. Good. His clothes fit her. He didn't miss the way she kept rubbing her arms. Her wounds were still raw. Sit. He gestured to a nearby stool. I'm going to inspect your injuries now. She nodded once, a curt bob of her head, little more. He took one slender arm in his hand and grimaced at what he found there. Her injuries were beginning to blacken around the edges, either a sign of bruises or infection. Not good. If he left this alone much longer, it might turn into something nasty, something he wouldn't be able to deal with. Gotta clean these before I heal him. Another nod. He sighed. You can talk, you know? Her lips thinned in a grimace. Am I allowed to? You did before, he pointed out. A pause. I was angry. I noticed. Geez, getting her to speak was like pulling teeth. It would have been so much easier if he still had Kurama, but he wasn't without his means. For all the claims of her craving wounds, the formless mother was still the lady of BLD, and her power was nothing to scoff at. Also his to command, at that. Just a matter of nudging his resident goddess to help him. I'd rather carve our enemies up, but I'll make an exception for you. He used her power to check for infection, now wasn't at all surprised to find some, then went to work cleansing and purifying it wherever it was found. It was admittedly slow going, if only because Albedo was clearly very much in a bad way. Not just injured, but malnourished. Whoever she was, wherever she'd lived on the surface, she'd not had a good life. At length he finished and sat back. There, that's sorted. Albedo made a little noise of surprise. So soon? Not quite. He pulled out a sealed bottle from his belt and dipped his hand within. That was just the first phase. He'd needed healing herbs into a paste for this very purpose, and while he was running low, he had enough to fix the deep cuts. This will help speed the healing. He laid it on her arms. Fair warning, it's a little cold. Albedo yelped and jerked on the stool like the child she was. You didn't say. It would be cold. He laughed a little. I tried to warn you. She pouted and said no more. Heal. He willed at the wounds, pushing his power into them as he lathered the cream across her injuries. Heal, heal, heal. Many an Omen had died before he'd gained this ability, before he'd become versed in the healing arts. Even then he'd seen more than his fair share of friends perish to disease and infection. He remembered their names, the few that he'd known. Their lives were often miserably short. It was simply a fact of life down here. You can change that. I intend to. He scowled as he finished bandaging her wound. You'll help, won't you? But of course, you forget, I am a goddess. The formless mother cooed in his ear, her voice the darkest Destructin. Eternal, ever-changing, I can whatever you want me to be. My power is yours. Take as many lovers or wives as you wish. But I shall be your unforgettable first, when you are of age, of course. That a proposal? She purred. Don't tempt me. A question nagged at him as he worked. What's the surface like? She blinked. tried to turn while he wrapped her wounds, then thought better of it. "You've not seen it? Not in this life." Her words brought on a faint pang of bitterness. In his first one, he'd seen many wonders. Not so his second. He'd been born in the dark, and Morgoth Dad seemed to think he would die in the dark like very other Omen before him. Naruto had other plans. Big plans. Great plans. Nebulous plans, each of which hinged on knowledge. He needed every bit he could get his hands on. "Old man won't let me have a look." He ate at length. Albedo went silent. He wondered if she would speak or ignore him again. The sunsets in Lanedale are lovely. Once he finally did, her voice proved a tremulous whimper. The full moon, even more so. Once the words came, she couldn't seem to stop. "I've seen the ocean once before, though I do not know how to swim." She still watched him like a hawk as she spoke, even as he worked on. Skittish thing. After what she'd suffered, he didn't much blame her. Perhaps she was right to be wary. "I have even been to the great plains of Kaled." He let her talk for a time. It gave him a chance to work the cream into her wounds. And done. His work complete, Naruto sat back and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. It felt good, knowing someone would survive because of him. All that remained was to finish the bandages. "Thank you, Miss TR." "Ma?" Naruto nearly choked on his spit. "Don't call me that." Albedo's bland expression didn't waver. "No sir, not in the least." "Of course, Miss TR." "Stop." He held up a hand to forestall further protest, words echoing in the hollow chamber. "I get enough royalty treatment already." Her eyes widened, and he realized his mistake a heartbeat later. He'd said too much. Shock tore her facade away. "Royalty?" She blinked quickly. "Thrice now." "You are of the Golden Order?" Naruto looked away, scratching at a whiskered cheek. "In a sense." "Your father called you his heir." Clever little girl. He could see the gears of her mind already turning in that horned head of hers. But that would mean. Realization dawned in her eyes, and she knelt to press her head to the filthy floor, startling him terribly. "My prince." "No, my lord, Lord Naruto. I am unworthy of such kindness." Heat hit the back of Naruto's neck. Oi, don't do that. Up with you." She complied only in part, rising to her knees. "What do you intend to do with me now?" "Suppose that depends on you." He considered his handiwork and checked the gauze for any sign of dampness. Her wounds still bled faintly, but that was to be expected. She'd recover soon enough. "What do you want to do, Albedo?" he asked her, for lack any better idea. "Where do you intend to go from here?" "I do not know. Wait." Her eyes widened with neither nor warning. "When I ran down here, you were waiting for me. How did you know I would use that entrance?" Confusion flickered in him. "I didn't?" "Please don't insult my intelligence." Her wings drooped. "The chances of you being in the right place at the right time are minuscule at best. You must have planned it." Oi, what does she think I am? Some kind of overlord mastermind?" The formless mother howled with laughter in his head. "Perhaps not. Helping. You were hunting prey, weren't you?" Albedo remained oblivious to their inner diatribe, blissfully unaware of the argument they'd just had. Her voice pitched, raw with emotions, a passion that had his hair leaping into his throat. Even her wings were twitching now, such was her excitement. "You were waiting for someone like me to come along. I was the bait." Golden eyes roved over the trophies he'd mounted to his wall, weapons and old armor of fallen foes. "I should have known." "Now wait but you killed the Omen killer." Just as quickly, her face fell. "Do you intend to throw me away now that I've served my purpose?" He shot her a baleful look. "Of course not. Why would you even think that?" "Then you must have some grand plan for me." She bowled into his personal space, wearing a euphoric grin. "A use, too close, way too close. Won't you tell me?" Naruto sighed. It really was a sad thing when someone was so broken that they had to make up a reason for their existence. Telling her the truth would only hurt he. They'd met by pure chance. Nothing more, nothing less. If hadn't been there she would have died, and probably did, in another timeline. Of course saying such would trivialize her. Or worse, break her even more than she already was. And he did like the idea of having a friend. So be it. If the idea of him being some mad mastermind gave her peace, then he would do it. "You're right, Albedo." Her eyes lit up. "I knew it. I wanted a companion." He sank back into his chair and crossed one leg over the other, mimicking a regal mien he'd once seen old Morgott wear while holding court in the shunning grounds. "I've been looking for someone like you for a long time. Now?" Not a lie, but not entirely the truth, either. He'd left her figure out her own answer. "And you chose a lowly wretch such as me?" Sure enough, Albedo did. Although the younger Omen raised her head, she clasped her hands together before her tunic, almost as though she were praying to him. "I am honored, my lord." She sketched a clumsy curtsy as best she could and bowed her. "I, Albedo, pledge myself to you, body and soul. You shall have my heart until my last breath." "No." Her head snapped up, slitted golden eyes creasing as she granted him a wide grin. "Beyond that, I am yours, forevermore. See that you are." The formless mother kept laughing in his head. "Ugh." Naruto palmed his face with an inner whine and felt his ego shrivel up. "Quiet, you. I'm a city actor." How did she believe that bull? "Simple. Look at her. She seems quite smitten." Albedo squirmed in place beneath their gaze, knees twisting from side to side as she awaited his judgment. Her eyes met his. She squirmed a little more, knees twisting to and fro in thinly veiled excitement. Clearly she expected praise, or orders at the very least. Naruto reached out and patted her head. He didn't miss the way her wings twitched happily at her sides. "I look forward to working with you, Albedo." She made a pleased hum and leaned into his hand. Her grin was too pure. The weight of what he'd done crashed down onto him. "Seems I've taken on a rather troublesome girl." "Indeed you have. I'll let her have you, for now." Silence reigned supreme. Albedo's stomach made a tiny, plaintive sound, cutting off his thoughts. A blonde eyebrow quirked. "When was the last time you ate?" she squirmed. "I do not remember." No wonder she was so thin. Naruto shooed her over to a rickety table. "We can have an early meal, then." He didn't mind skipping dinner tonight. She needed it more than him. In short order, he raided his pitiful pantry and laid out what passed for a feast in the underground. Simple fare, all things considered. Little more than bread and cheese served with a bit of cooked meat and tepid water to wash the later down. Nothing special, really. He'd eaten more than this as an orphan back in the village. For a starving urchin such as Albedo, it may well have been a feast. He could see her drooling. "May I?" Naruto waved her on. "Don't wait on my account." She tore into the food with reckless abandon. Nothing survived, not even crumbs. She would have put an Akamichi to shame. "Was it good?" She turned watery eyes on him. "Yes, very." An idea dawned. There were other Omen in the sewers. Children, just like him and Albedo. Those who hadn't yet been beaten down in body and spirit. Most of the older Omens were half mad, rooted and rotted in their ways. But not the younger ones. Not like them. If he could befriend them as he had Albedo, well, in time, they could become his army. He could save all Omenkind, just by being kind. "Uncle Moog." The one-eyed Omen jumped, and swore as he lost control of his spell. A torrent of blood flame ricocheted into the ceiling and scorched it black. A pity. He'd tried to conjure a phantom from BLD, but it seemed he hadn't the control for it. Or the concentration, thanks to a certain interruption. Alas, this, then, was a failure. "Blast it, boy." He leaned on his trident and pivoted to face his guest. "Don't sneak up on me like that, oh. Oh ho. Oh ho ho. Who was that with him?" Well, well, he arched a blackened brow her way. "Finally yourself an acolyte, have you?" He'd meant it as a jest, a way to sound out this little wisp of a girl Morgott seemed so cross about. He didn't expect her reply, certainly not so happily. "Indeed I am." Naruto palmed his face. "Albedo? No? So that was her name." Moog's good IFL cat over her, noting her beauty. Most Omen were ugly in some way or another. Yet even with her scars, the girl wasn't. Someday she would grow to be a true beauty. Perhaps she was a child from one of the minor noble houses. She had an Eastern look to her. He took another look at her, saw the scars on her arms and legs, and her wrists. He knew the signs. She'd been someone's plaything before she came down here. Perhaps even tried to take her life. Concerning, he'd need to keep an eye on her. Still, she seemed to be in better spirits than before. Naruto's work, no doubt. He had a talent for lifting up the disenfranchised. The boy heard the formless mother as he did not. She communed with him near constantly these days, whereas he barely heard whispers of her will anymore. Such did not make him jealous, of course. He was glad his nephew understood the right of things. They worshipped the true goddess. Her brothers and sisters were false idols, all pretenders to the throne. This was the way. The formless mother seldom spoke to him these days. There was a reason for that. She had already told him all there was to know. At the moment of the boy's birth he had been granted vision, truth, understanding. He is the key, she had said. Protect him. He was their hope. In countless realities did this boy exist. In many worlds, he wore many different faces, wielded many powers, gifts to boggle the mind. However, only in this one was he reborn as an Omen. Only in this era did their people truly rise up to throw off the yoke of the Golden Order. Only in this did the formless mother gain a true champion. He knew not what the ending would be, or if he would even live to see it. The boy was quick study, eager and willing to learn. Soon, the time would come. Very soon indeed. Poor Morgoth. His brother had no idea. He, who was so loyal to the Order, was raising the very man who would happily tear it down. Good. Mother deserved to have her empire crumble down around her ears for what she'd done to them. Even if Morgoth cursed him for it. Change must come, and this boy was the catalyst. To that end, there was no lengths to which Moog wouldn't go. What can I do for the two of you? His nephew grinned. We want to go outside. What? Naruto clasped both hands before his face. Please us, just for a little bit. Outside, he says. Moog heaved a sigh and stamped down on the brief swell of irritation that came with it. Yes, of course. You wouldn't pick something simple. No, we can't have an easy request now, would we? The children stared at him. His shoulders sagged. There could be no besting them. If you are caught. We won't be, determined little lad. Then I shall teach you each a spell. It won't last long. Naruto's face lit up. Looking back, he hadn't chosen to be an uncle, any more than Morgoth had chosen to be a father. The boy had chose him. Perhaps they would make something of themselves this time around. Who could say? You truly fear nothing, do you? He chortled softly. Not the formless mother, nor the frenzied flame, nor even the greater will. The projections I am about to teach you will useful, this I will not deny. Even so, your true body may never leave the underground, not as you wish it. Naruto gave him a grim look, eyes flashing. We'll just see about that. Moog laughed. Indeed we shall. This boy was their hope. He truly was an omen of change. The Omen killers arrived under cover of darkness. 7 in all, they came in force, their fell purpose painfully clear. For once, they were not accompanied them. 6 men, 4 women, 17 in all. A sizable force had never graced the sewers in some time. They would not be enough. Not by a long shot. Moog considered their foolish nighttime attack something a misnomer really, for the subterranean shunning grounds were often bathed in the dark these days. Little in the way of light. Reach down here in the depths. Were it not for torches and the odd spell cast by the occasional kindly mage, one would flounder endlessly in the gloom. After all, it was easy to lose one's way in the sewers if one didn't know where they were going. Even an unwary Omen might find themselves lost if they didn't keep their wits about that. Truly, it would be a pity if an accident were to befall these honored guests. The formless mother rarely spoke to him these days. Her attention was with his nephew. Yet even though he knew her will, protect the boy, safeguard him, shelter him from those who would to him harm. Whatever his brother's madness, one could not expect the world to wait for them. His trident tapped down. Once, twice, thrice now, a hollow chime rang through the sewers, echoing endless in on itself. Deep yet soft, it reverberated across the space and time, seeking not the intruders, not these foul mindless men and women with their twisted masks and horned cleavers. No, he sought a more subtle target. One by one, the lights died. The world plunged into the abyss. He heard their startled murmurs in the dark as they shuffled forward. Their gasps now, as the mages tried to conjure light, only to falter and fail. None noticed the black mist he'd created in the gloom. Their flailing gave him time to observe them closely. Odd that the bestial brutes had brought their more enlightened kin. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps the brutes were being guided by the mages, led like the leashed beasts they were. This was the work of Gideon, wasn't it? Only that oaf would be so bold foolish, to strike here in the heart of their power. Morgoth would not care. He adored such agents of the Golden Order. He would welcome Gideon's men with open arms. The all-knowing would have but to ask, and he would gladly give him anything he wished, even the if-head of his own son. Young Naruto was not ready for Gideon's mad machinations. He must be prepared. And so it fell to him. Moog had chosen his waiting well, a narrow walkway leading from one end of the sewers to another, a perilous drop with naught but the abyss on either side. Anyone who sought to approach would be forced to do so one at a time in single file. Their spells would be useless in the mist he'd conjured, unless they'd thought to bring archers, in which case he might find himself rather harried. Ah, but here they came, and he must greet them like a good host. No. Welcome, honored guests. Moog chortled softly, stepping out of the shadows. To the birthplace of our dynasty. Unfortunately, you've a tad early for the festivities. As such, you cannot pass. He tapped his trident against the ground, the metal ringing hollowly across the walkway. Mentally, he marshaled his power, preparing his trident. Our hope lies beyond here. Turn back, you shall not have him. Trez, we know our duty, Omen scum. A growl pierced the gloom. Stand aside or die with your fellows duo. The one-eyed Omen skewered him and flung him shrieking into the abyss. Unius. He turned to face the others. You shall not pass. Rings of BLD encircled their bodies. He moved his trident upward. Nile. The survivors fell in a cacophony of shrieks, drowning in a torrent of their own BLD. All of them perished to a man, all save one. One, whose wounds Moog healed and plucked from the brink of the death. He seized the survivor's ankle, a woman, and began to drag her away. A fitting prize. An insensate groan greeted his ears. He considered waking her. Decided against it. It was well that she slept. For now, soon, she would never sleep again. Now then, let us see what secrets your BLD holds. Guests had come to the sewers. Visitors were not uncommon in the depths, but seldom did they linger. Outcast and the odd merchants, those who used the forgotten paths, travelers who ventured where they shouldn't. Adventures too bold for their own good. Some entered the underground. Few returned. For you see, down here in the underground there was only one rule, one creed that had survived through decades and would for a great many yet. The weak died. The strong survived. For anything to change, such a creed would have to be broken, shattered, destroyed utterly. Not from without, but within. Ah, but he digressed. But these were rare guests indeed. Not travelers or merchants, these. For you see, the demigods had arrived. Naruto heard it in the whispers of his brothers and sisters among the Omen. Saw it in their furtive glances and hurried steps as they clamored for cover in the dark. Not him. He didn't run away from the danger. He walked towards it. Most sprinted in the opposite direction. They wanted nothing more than to hide, stick their heads in the sand, and pretend nothing had changed. Honestly, he pitied them. Gods didn't come down here. He'd never so much as glimpsed one until today. Not once. None living at any rate. Maybe the old man was slipping. Maybe Morgoth had failed to find these two in time. Or maybe, the formless mother cooed in the back of his head. He meant for you to discover them first. Morgoth? Unlikely. He had an ironclad grip down here. No way did he intend for this to happen. He had to find them. He must. This might be his chance to change things. What did it matter if they came from above ground? He didn't care who they were. They'd not done him any wrong. He'd been born down here, unlike the rest. This was a chance to wipe away the old prejudices, and maybe, just maybe, start anew. If only he could make them see. He had to make them see. That was his hope. His dream. Naruto did not run from destiny like so many others. He ran towards it. He'd have to thank Moog for this opportunity. Nothing else made sense. Whatever he was doing had Morgoth distracted. Rather, he was the only one who could distract the so-called Omen King. He wouldn't waste this opportunity. But how to go about it? He knew how they must look in their eyes, and convincing him to talk would be a problem. My lord, a gentle, silken voice tugged at his consciousness. Why have we stopped? He paused in mid-step, drawn from his thoughts by Albedo's words. 3 years after that fateful day, and she was lovelier than ever. Life had been kind to her since they'd met. No, that wasn't entirely fair. Life would have seen her caught by that Omen killer and PND into a pulp. That she had survived. Thrived. Down here was due to him and him alone. She'd been fed the best food he could find down here, bathed in actual water, washed her hair with his own homemade shampoo. He'd even found her passable clothes to replace her rags as she outgrew them. In place of her once tattered attire, she now wore a pale white robe burnished with faded gold trimmings, the better to contrast her dark hair and striking golden eyes alongside her horns. She was happy and healthy. In so much as one could be down here. He'd scrimped and saved and scrounged for her sake, sacrificing his own health to give her and others a decent life down in the depths. It's nothing. A keen blue eye blinked over his shoulder, squinting beneath his crown of horns. Just thinking. Might I inquire as to what? Curious as ever. The future, he said at last. I see. Her lively golden eyes flashed as she misunderstood him spectacularly. You must have seen this coming, as expected of my Mstr Tilda. Naruto narrowly resisted the urge to balk. No. Surely she didn't think this was his doing. Suspension of disbelief only went so far. Eh? Now, she patted his arm, wings flapping in thinly disguised glee. There's no need to be so humble, right? He raised a hand and muffled a groan against his palm. Albedo really did overestimate him. Because I somehow saw this coming. But of course Tilda, did she not understand sarcasm? No, there was no point trying to argue WTH. Her. Let's go. His second made a pleased noise and followed him wholeheartedly. Even so his gaze traced back to her, watching her out the corner of his eye. Albedo's smile worried him, even as she trailed behind him. She looked a little too smug today. Almost dangerously so. Her hips swung with every step. She didn't so much walk as she did strut. And her smile, yikes. The last time she'd worn that smile, she had come back to him covered in BLD, which especially worried him, given she didn't have so much as a speck of BLD on her at present. All right, he sighed, threading his way around a bit of broken pipe. I'll bite. What did you do, and to whom did you do it? Albedo only giggled, wings twitching in glee. It's a surprise. I'm sure you'll be pleased, Tilda. I like her. Naruto sighed. You would. They found their quarry before he could think to pry further. He spied them from afar. Two hooded figures in the distance, tucked in an alcove. Heard their words echoing through the subterranean shunning grounds. Is foolish. We should turn back. Came this far. Nonsense. He took them in at a glance. They were but two. One was a man, tall of broad shoulders. The other as not a woman, but not a child either, by her build. Each wore fine cloaks, too fine for any but gods to have. Many an Omen sneered at them in passing, but they remained unbowed. Odd, he wondered. What cause they had to be here? No, never mind that. This was his chance. Where most Omens might scoff and sneer, he saw an opportunity. They still hadn't noticed them. He coughed into his fist to catch their attention. Looking for something? The taller of the duo turned, alarmed, but only for a moment. He glimpsed wide golden eyes beneath the cowl, locked firmly on him. You look just like. He blinked. Like. My apologies. The man comported himself quickly, and the moment was lost. Greetings, young Omen. He sketched a genteel bow. Please forgive our intrusion. Might you know where we can find the lord of this realm, perchance, Morgott? No. No way in hell was he sending them to his old man. Depends on what you need. We might be able to help ya. The man's companion huffed, her voice the softest of sighs. This is pointless, Godwin. Naruto stiffened. Godwin the Golden? Well. The formless mother hummed. What brings a scion of the golden lineage down here? Pointless, Albedo bridled, utterly missing the byplay. Choose your words carefully when speaking to my lord. Lord of what? The hooded girl scoffed. All I see is an empire of dirt. Why you? Naruto grabbed her by the arm. Relax. Patience, sister. Godwin cautioned his companion in the same instant. They may be able to help us. Let us tell them our purpose here. He asked as much. Godwin's companion beat him to the punch. Very well, she huffed. If the two of thee must know, we seek a murderer who has taken shelter here. A man wanted for high treason in Lanedell and crimes most foul. You may know him as the Dung Eater. We have been tasked with bringing this fiend to justice. Naruto made a disgusted noise, one he felt in the very pit of his soul. Never heard of him. That name? Albedo tilted her head and touched a finger to her lips. Dung Eater, you say? Oh, comprehension smacked a fist into an open palm. I believe I know of whom you speak. I encountered someone just the other who referred to himself by such a title. He was quite the cantankerous fellow. Naruto heaved a sigh. The reason for her earlier smile suddenly became all too clear. You already killed him, didn't you? She recoiled, touching one hand to her bosom. Of course not. I would never be so gauche. Great. He released a quick breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then you can, I just tortured him a little and took his sword as a trophy. He flung up his arms with a cry. Albedo. What? It was a nice sword. Godwin chuckled softly at his plight. Worry not. I take no offense. Although, may I have a look at you? Naruto stiffened. Excuse me? Careful now. She didn't have to tell him twice. Godwin leaned closer, considering him as one might a fine jewel. As I thought, he said at last. You resemble him. Forgive my secrecy, but it's so nice to finally meet you. Much to Naruto's chagrin, the man smiled and tugged back his hood, revealing his face. Here at last, he saw the resemblance to Morgoth. I had not thought my brother would be so quick to sire a child. Nevertheless, here you are. Remarkable. A hand clapped his shoulder. I'm sorry we left you here, nephew. His world fractured, cracked, shattered. Now, Godwin was his uncle. For once, his silver tongue finally failed him. The formless mother hummed a sigh. This is certainly an unexpected development. Are you all right? Naruto tried to speak. He really did. All that emerged was gibberish. And then, I have an uncle. Albedo looked left. Right. Left again. Frowned now. There does seem to be a resemblance. Indeed you do. Godwin's smile lived up to his namesake. I wish we could have met sooner. He noticed Albedo a moment later. And who is this? Albedo stood on the very tips of her toes, trying to making herself appear taller. Naruto didn't miss the pleading, anguished look in her eyes. How could he possibly deny her before all these people? Someone very dear to me. Ah, I see. Your consort then? Naruto squawked. Albedo squeaked. Godwin barreled right through it all. Then she is as family to us. The hooded girl scoffed. What nonsense is this? Surely you jest, Godwin. The boy I could understand, but the girl. You cannot simply declare such a thing. This is no jest. The firstborn of the demigods took his hand away and straightened. Come now. Godwin's gaze slid to the hooded woman, more a girl. Really, who'd come down here with him? Don't be shy. We are all family here. The younger demigod scoffed. You have a strange definition of the word. Ranny. Pa, she harumphed. Very well. Nevertheless, she tugged aside her hood. Dazzling scarlet hair spilled forth to frame a young face before tapering off into a long braid flowing down her left shoulder. Piercing emerald eyes glared green daggers at them. Naruto felt himself taken aback by the sight of her. There was wisdom in her gaze, a keen intellect lurking behind that imperious beauty. Despite his best efforts to remain impartial, he found himself struck by the sight of her. Albedo noticed and made a displeased noise behind him, but even she stared. And then Ranny ruined it all by opening her mouth. Nephew, was it? You will take us to where you last saw this dung-eater at once, she demanded of them. We would have words with him. Do so, and we might show you some small modicum of leniency, perhaps even liberate you from this hovel. Beach. His right eye twitched. Any awe Naruto might have felt for her died in a ditch. His smile turned positively saccharine. Sure thing, right after you get that stick out your butt. The formless mother's howling laughter in his head nearly drowned out the spectacle that followed. Albedo smirked. Godwin snorted, muffling a bark of laughter behind his right palm. The witch turned redder. Then absolutely sputtered. I beg your pardon? As far as first impressions went, theirs was certainly a memorable one. She's not overly fond of you, is she? Nuo, ya think? Naruto scoffed a little at the formless mother's remark, and he ducked under a rusted gate. What could possibly have given it away? Was it sulking? I bet it was the sulking. Sarcasm does not become you, my champion. Maybe not. He felt the ghost of a smile touch his whiskered face as he led Ranny and Godwin him through the sewers. Well, Albedo led this time. He followed her just this once, and the demigods with him. Nevertheless, he rolled one shoulder in a shrug. Payback does, though. In 3, 2, 1. Arg! Ranny yelped behind him as she smacked her head on the very same gate he'd avoided. Blasted boy, why didn't you warn me? But Aunt Ranny, he clasped both hands behind his head, feigning ignorance. I thought demigods were invulnerable to all threats, physical or magical. She glared golden daggers at him. That is a myth, and you bloody well know it. Do I? He touched a finger to his chin. How could an ignorant Omen possibly know such things? Boy, her pale face darkened thunderously. "If you won't hold your tongue, then I will gladly remove it for you," he grinned right back. "You're welcome to try and take it," which, now, Godwin interposed himself between the two of them with a limpid smile and drew the angry witch aside before they could come to blows. "Perhaps we should take a breather. We've been walking for some time. No, let us take a breather and collect ourselves." "I'll collect his tongue." Strong arms guided her away. Now, sister, be at peace." Naruto let them go with a rueful sigh and planted his back against a wall to compose himself. Demigods. Down here, rubbing elbows with lowly omens, forced to rely on them as guides, still made him laugh a little. And if Ranny didn't like him? Too bad and tough melons. He didn't give a flying fig for what she thought of him, Albedo, or anyone else. No, wait, he told a lie. On the contrary, he took some small spiteful pleasure in her disgust and constant complaints as much as her discomfort. Even now he could hear her complaints echoing off the walls. Doubtlessly she was using a spell to try and conceal them, but she failed to realize just how thin magic truly was in the depths. He saw right through her pitiful veil. Indeed, he heard every word. As such, he found himself privy to a rather interesting argument. "Was a mistake. We shouldn't be here. The boy is a fool, and the girl isn't much better." "You will not speak that way to family. Godwin, I know you favor him, but ugh, this smell. Had I known we would be walking in this filth, I would have sent Reichert in my stead. He is far better suited to extracting information than I." "Nonsense. This requires a delicate touch. There is no one I trust more in this matter." "Your words humble me, brother, but I fail to see why we need. He's seen through your spell." "Sister, haven't you noticed?" Ranny absolutely hissed and said no more. Naruto hummed and thumbed his chin. "Alwa, MDM fussy britches wasn't used to the dirt, or the sludge, or the muck. Too bad. So sad." In hindsight, he knew he wasn't being fair to Ranny. Really, he did. But after her callous words, he just couldn't bring himself to care overmuch for what she thought of him. A part of him should be excited, and he was, in a sense. This was his aunt. He had an aunt. Family, even if she was an absolute beach. And another uncle. Why had Morgot dad never told him? Did Moog know? Had he kept it a secret, too? Nah, Uncle Moog was all right. He wouldn't do something like that. Even now, he was keeping Morgot's eye off them. He didn't want to consider what said distraction might cost him. Not much. The formless mother answered with a hum. "He offered him good wine last night. I believe they're both still sleeping it off." Ha, speaking of family, Godwin really wasn't half bad himself. Felt like he was trying too strong sometimes, but oddly enough that endeared the man to him. Reminded him of who he'd been in his first life, before this one had hardened him. Always eager to please, wanting everyone to get along, ever seeking peace, and he still did. He just wasn't about to put up with an uppity witch in need of a good spanking. "Lord Naruto?" Albedo's voice drew him out of his maudlin thoughts. He looked back to find her leaning against him, those bright golden eyes looking to him once more. She'd latched onto his elbow when he wasn't looking and threaded an arm through his, the better to keep him from getting away. Clingy girl. But he didn't mind. She'd always been like this, even when they were little. A blonde brow rose. "What's wrong?" Her gaze strayed back to the demigods. "Can we trust them, Godwin?" "Maybe." Jury was still out on Ranny. He settled for a shrug. "If they're using us, we're doing the same of them." This was their chance to prove themselves while Morgot wasn't looking. Their deeds here today might well go a long way to establishing a rapport between them and the demigods. They could build upon that foundation in the future. But for now they needed to lay the stones. "Though I do wonder, surely you knew of this dung-eater. Why not deal with him yourself, then?" Naruto winced. Had he known something like that was down here, he would have dealt with them. Personally. The sewers were dangerous enough without soul-cursing lunatics running about. Of course, Albedo would never believe that he had missed a madman like this. Even if she did, it was a lapse on his part. It would shake her worldview of him. That might well break her fragile psyche altogether. He disliked the idea of deceiving her, but it was for her own good. "I had hoped to give you a chance to test against a powerful opponent." Her wings beat once behind her. "As expected of my lord," Godwin's voice rang out behind them. "Have you calmed your mind?" Naruto grunted noncommittally. "I'm calm. Enough." Ranny huffed and looked away. "Excellent. Godwin gestured to Albedo. Shall we go, then? Her wings drooped with a sigh. Very well. If memory serves, it's not far now. The first of the demigods remained all smiles. By all means, lead on. I would like to ask you something in the interim while we walk. Would you tell me more of the MSTR you serve? Well, that was one way to earn Albedo respect. Happily Tilda, she walked ahead and Godwin went with her, wasn't strong to guess why. Yup, Ranny was behind him all right, following at a distance and all but refusing to look at him. Seemed old Godwin wanted him to make up with her. Pity it wasn't going to work. She had proven herself a pompous princess, thus far and little more, capable only of passing on her arrogance. She would never change at this rate. Down they went through the depths, a labyrinthine maze of pipes and corridors without end. Naruto felt his apprehension rising as they neared their destination. He rarely went this deep anymore. No doubt their guests would have been long lost without them. Just how deep had the dung eater gone? He knew what lay in the deepest depths of this place. Moog had warned him. Shadow and flame, you are quiet. Ranny's voice intruded upon the solace of his thoughts like a blanket of cold snow. Have you nothing to say? Well. Color him surprised. He hadn't thought she would speak, but kept walking regardless. Nothing to talk about. The Omen girl. His aunt said, apropos of nothing. She is powerful. How did you win her loyalty? He glanced over his shoulder. She has a name, you know. Albedo, then? She waved a hand dismissively, impatient for answers. How did you do it? Anger sparked in his heart again. Naruto stomped it down. By being kind, he retorted. Something you clearly know very little about. Is that why you insult me so? Ranny took the barb in stride. I am kind to those I know, Omen. I know thee not. It would behoove her to try. The formless mother mirrored her contempt. This wench knows not whim she trifles with. I could snuff her out like a candle in the wind. Ranny might well disagree if she knew he was working with an outer goddess. Then try. He snapped back. That is what I am doing now, you oaf, she snapped waspishly. Godwin claims you. Our family. That is the only reason I am making an attempt in the first place. I did not know you even existed before today. None of us did, save Godwin, us. Still, if this was what she called an attempt, he wasn't impressed. Then try harder. Enough of this farce, Ranny grabbed at his arm, reeling him back before he could outpace her with surprising strength for one of her stature. Am I the only one to see through your performance? This charade of yours? Is it possible so many could be so stupid, for so long? Naruto FLC at a glance past her. Albedo and Godwin were well ahead of them, consumed in conversation with one another. They were unlikely to hear him. Fine. No more games. A rueful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. There are times when I have trouble believing it myself. Then why bother? Ranny hissed back. Why perpetuate this farce? You're no mastermind, no grand strategist, despite what Godwin and your follower may think. She glanced ahead at them. You're a creature of instinct, one whose luck has brought him this far, yes, but luck has its limits, and why are you laughing at me? Because, how could he not? For one who saw so much, the witch was remarkably blind. You actually think I have an ulterior motive? Everyone does. You are no different. Naruto grabbed her by the hair and yanked, cutting her off yelp with a hand over her mouth. Their foreheads met as he glowered at her. So many omens down here in the depths. He hissed the words, each wanting to be the loudest, the strongest, the smartest. Then one by one, they all die. Do you understand? He yanked harder on her hair, forcing her to look at him with wide eyes. I don't want to be the loudest, the strongest, and I'm certainly not the smartest. It was the truth. He wasn't the best. Far from it. I just want to stay alive and keep those I care about alive, safe, and happy. And if that means letting folks think I'm some omnipotent omen of an overlord, then so be it. So long as my friends and family get out of this dump. So go ahead. Tell your brother. Tell them all about the weakling you think I am. He leaned closer, lips brushing her ear. No one will believe you. His piece said. He let Ranny go. The witch stumbled away, tried to speak, thought better of it when he growled, then raced ahead to join Albedo and Godwin. Leave it to the latter to notice. Perceptive BSTRD. Rather than stay out of it like a sensible demigod, Godwin fell back to match his pace. You provoke her needlessly. His smile never wavered, even now as they walked. But it seems sad, somehow. Do you not have enough enemies already? Was this what it felt like to have another uncle? Naruto wasn't entirely sure he liked it. She started that mess, perhaps, his new uncle allowed. But you and I are of the golden lineage. We must be better. A blow brow rose. Aren't you and Rani siblings, half-siblings? Marika's firstborn chortled softly as they rounded another bend. Our family tree is ... complicated, for those who know the truth. You would find it more baffling still if you met Radon and Rykard, to say nothing of father himself. His right ear twitched. I have a grandfather? Careful, now. The formless mother tutted softly in his head. BLD isn't always thicker than water. You of all people know that. And a grandmother. Godwin settled a guiding hand on his shoulder, gently steering him after Albedo and Rani. I suspect Mother would find your bluntness most refreshing. But that means Rani's still my aunt? Indeed she is. He paused to watch her rapidly retreating backside. I would ask that you forgive her. Little Rani is not adept at showing her emotions, but she can be quite kind once you get to know her. You would not think her such a cold witch if you saw her playing with Blade and Iggy. Strong to imagine this angry witch ever being anything other than surly. Maybe I don't want to know her. Godwin sighed. That is your choice, but I would ask that you reconsider. She hasn't much time left. Brother, Rani cried up ahead. We found him. For the first time since he'd met him, Godwin stopped smiling. Where? This way. Albedo led them to a filth-encrusted ladder. His cell is just past here. I already cleared out all the plants and traps here during my first encounter with the creature. She tilted her head to look up it, peering into the darkness beyond. He's still up there, hiding like a rat, seeking his wounds. A small, dark smile graced her otherwise appealing face. I can smell him, and someone else. Curious. Rani gagged at the sight of the dirty ladder. I shan't be touching that, Albedo scoffed. Then jump, witch. Without so much as a passing glance, the winged Omen did just that, hurtling upward into the shadows. Godwin granted them a nod, kicked his way up, and vanished soon thereafter. Rani cast a despairing glance after them and made no move to climb or otherwise ascend. She inched forward, then shrank back at the last second, unwilling to dirty her hands. Problem. My talents tend toward the magical, not so much the physical. She mumbled. In the end, Naruto took pity on his so-called aunt. Fine, I'll help you. Just this once. Up you go. Wait, what are you doing? Rani yelped as he swept her up into his arms like a princess. I didn't ask you to carry me. Words peaked into a shriek as they rocketed upward. Unhand me. He did so almost absently, ignoring her protest about sullied honor and never being able to marry. Albedo and Godwin were up ahead, just round the bend. He could hear raised voices with them, and among them a man's muttering, dark depraved ravings. The sound of it made him shiver. Curse them, a curse upon them all. He rounded the bend, and saw. Albedo hadn't been gentle with a dung-eater. He knew she hadn't, but he didn't think she would have been this vicious. His face was a bruised mess, one eye torn clean out, his left ear a red ruin, hair a lank and foul mess. He hadn't been handsome before, but without his helm he was truly an ugly creature, bashing his head against the wall, wailing like the lunatic he was. The formless mother hissed. Beware. This thing is no longer a man. The spirits wail around him. There was someone, in the cell behind him, but he didn't have time to see that or them, because his uncle stepped out of the shadows. Dungeeter, Godwin's voice pierced the gloom in a singular shout, bringing an end to the madman's rant. In the name of Queen Marika the Eternal, you are under arrest for crimes most foul. Surrender yourself to the Erdtree's judgment, and you may yet be shown mercy. His arms snapped up, lazily swatting aside a foul incantation. Albedo tutted. Or you can perish here, by our hands. Would you rather I take your other eye? Ha! The battered thing that had once been. A man rounded on them, slavering, no, grinning through broken teeth. Now the demigods themselves hunt me. I'm honored. His good eye rolled fitfully in his head as he laughed. Well, I shall not abandon it. I shan't. Never. I earned it. I did. And you. A festering finger stabbed Naruto's way. I see you, boy. We see you. Cities burn in your eyes. The lands will burn when you rise. Rani sighed. Surrender. The man lunged at them with a yowl, dirty fingers grasping for their faces. A pox on you all. I will never yield. Never. Not ever. You hear? The curse is unending. He went mad. Truly, there was no other word for it. If the Dung Eater hadn't been crazed before they encountered him, then he certainly was now. Rather than back down when faced with 4 powerful opponents, as any sane individual would, he laughed and threw himself headlong at them, grabbing for anyone and everyone in reach. Naruto found himself jerking backwards despite his better judgment. This wasn't the act of a warrior, but a raving lunatic, an accursed creature determined to inflict as much pain and suffering as possible before it perished. None of them wanted to be touched or otherwise cursed by that thing, and so they scattered, and in his madness, the Dung Eater went for the one person who had already harmed him. You took my sword and my eye. Woman, I'll have your horns for that. He never reached Albedo. Naruto didn't give him a chance. A hand latched onto Lunatic's shoulder, ducked the grasping backhand that followed, whirled now, and drove a racing into the brute's armored back. What should have been a lethal blow it should have been, only sent the Dung Eater stumbling forward a few steps with an angry grunt. Naruto regarded his palm with a frown. Strange. Something had resisted him, weakened the jutsu at the last instant, preventing him from breaking the BSTRD's armor. What on earth? The formless mother hissed a warning. He raised his arms on pure reflex. It saved his life. He never saw the spells that struck him, but he certainly heard the screams, felt the curses sear his palms, sap his strength, and slam him into a wall. A pox. The Dung Eater screamed, and yet more wraiths burst forth from his body, countless and innumerable, assailing them in a tide of shrieking wails. A pox upon you all! Through bleary eyes he saw Godwin burst through it all, eyes ablaze. A blade of purest light sang in one hand, a blazing incantation conjured in the other. A spear of purest lightning shot forth to skewer the Dung Eater in his right shoulder and nail him to the wall. The wretched creature shrieked like a struck pig, and tore himself free, uncaring of the bloody wound he left behind. Just as well he did. Godwin's blade bit through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat before, fiery molten metal cleaving through stone with liquid ease. Undeterred by his brief brush with death, the Dung Eater tumbled to safety and stabbed a hand into his belt pouch, foul fingers grasping for an item. They came up holding a strange fleshy, wriggling thing, something moving, something alive, and yet dead all the same. A pang of dread kicked to life in Naruto's heart. Godwin struck down at it for a crippling blow, only to find himself rebuffed by a wall of deepest darkness. It surged forth like the tide, ripped him from his feet, and sent him sprawling into Albedo, casting them across the chamber. Fool! The Dung Eater cackled at their plight. I am blessed by a power far beyond your comprehension. The moon itself has smiled upon me. Its power is mine. You dare speak such heresy? Randy shrieked her defiance and raised a hand, brandishing her staff with it. A wave of blue light slammed into the soulless creature, only to sizzle harmlessly against his thick armor. I am beyond you now. He rounded on her to cast more curses her way, forcing her to conjure a barrier just to defend herself. His spells tore right through it and left her buckling with a scream, one he laughed over anew with all the glee of a mad child. All of you, I have seen the truth of the world in all its wretched glory, the illusion that is this life. You are nothing to me, naught but Yugach. Naruto had only just begun to right himself when he saw the blade burst from the Dung Eater's chest. His curses fizzled out. The ghastly object he held fell from his fingers to land upon the floor with a wet splat and tried to crawl back toward him. Move into him from behind. Albedo twisted her blade in the wound, smiling softly. It seems I was too gentle with you before. She crooned in his ear as she dug the blade deeper into his flesh. Perhaps this time I should take your other eye and that wagging tongue of yours besides. Wench, the Dung Eater backhanded her away with a heavy gauntlet strike. You shall take no more from me this day. You. Naruto righted himself a heartbeat later, and that glassy eye focused on him again, to the exclusion of all else, paying no heed to the wounded woman now sprawled at their feet. Just as well, too. It gave Albedo a blessed chance to retreat while that mad iris locked onto him. You, I know you. Yeah, he turned his head and spat a bloody gob. Feelings not mutual. Oh, yes. The Dung Eater bent to retrieve that wretched, wriggling talisman from the floor. It wriggled up his wrist and slithered into his wound, much Naruto's disgust. It is you, the one who was promised. In his peripherals, Naruto surveyed what remained of his allies. They looked about as shaky as he felt. Godwin was trying to set a broken arm. Rani was still shivering under the curses she'd been struck with, while Albedo had propped herself up on a wall to recover from the nasty blow she'd taken. They'd be fine, he was all too certain of that, but they needed time to recover. Time they wouldn't have if the Dung Eater went after them. Whatever he had been empowered with blocked or lessened their techniques, but he'd still taken a foul wound. When Albedo stabbed him, which meant, well, if jutsu won't work, I'll just use my bare hands. You're the one they told me to kill? Still he Dung Eater grinned at him through broken teeth. Oh, yes, I've defiled so many now, trying to lure you out. More than I can possibly remember. How many could you have saved? The inquiry turned Naruto's herd cold. What? So many fled from me, the murderer tittered. And yet none escaped. Because you were trapped down here. Ken. You hear their cries, I wonder? Naruto didn't want to. He knew better, that he was being baited, goaded into something foolish. But he didn't have a choice. Now that he'd been made aware of their plight, his eyes were open. He'd sensed an air of malevolence around the Dung Eater from the beginning, the very moment they met. But in sensing it, he misunderstood. In his hubris, he'd thought it merely the thoughts of one man. He'd been wrong. Now he understood. It was more than that. So much more. The cries came not from the man himself, but all the souls around him, every man, woman and child he had defiled. He listened to the souls, heard them scream, begging him for death, for release. It was too much. So much pain, so much death. Dozens? No, hundreds. Thousands. Surely one man couldn't kill so many. But he had, hadn't he? All these and more. He gripped his ears. And when that didn't work, his head now, desperate to shut them out. But he couldn't. How could one man monster do such a thing? It wasn't right, it wasn't fair, A red haze fell over his world, and he felt something he hadn't in an age. An odd, eerie feeling, hammering alongside his heart. Rage of omens. You can hear them, can't you? The Dung Eater grinned at him through chipped teeth, heedless of the hate in his eyes. All those souls, you could have saved them. But you didn't now, did you? You were too busy with your filthy kingdom and your filthy WHR. He was still speaking when clenched knuckles thundered into the side of his face. Naruto watched it all unfold in slow motion, his fist smashing into the filthy man's cheek, barreling by, rippling his unsightly visage like a stone flung into an empty pond. The Dung Eater's head snapped to the side. 3 teeth whistled free before momentum carried Naruto past. His sword hissed free and swung down immediately thereafter, slashing so strong that it physically shattered just above the hilt, even as he cut into his foe. Someone was screaming. Who? Who was it? Oh, a distant, dazed part of him realized. It's me. I'm doing that. Ha! The Dung Eater brayed happily, swaying on his feet. There he is. There's the monster not sated. He slammed the broken hilt into his sash and rounded on him again with an outraged snarl. No more words. Too much talk. Not enough bleeding. Naruto swung for the fences again. Metal buckled beneath his fist. The Dung Eater folded over the arm, now buried in his torso, but only for a moment. Spitting and slobbering, he lurched up at him, clawing for his face. A bruising headbutt stunned him and sent him tumbling down to the ground. Naruto caught the back of his head as he fell, reared up with the abomination's skull in hand, howled, and smashed his face into the ground. Once. Twice. Thrice now. A 4th time for good measure. Scarlet stains spattered the filthy cobblestones, rendering his nose a red stain upon the floor. And still the Dung Eater laughed. Naruto grabbed him by the shoulder and rolled him over, intent on silencing that laughter forever. Wait! Someone grabbed at one of his arms from behind, tried to reel him in, prevent him from going any further. He drove a bony elbow back and was rewarded with a crunch, punctuated by a yelp of pain. The hands fell away, but his moment of inattention cost him dearly, because the Dung Eater was rising now, trying to roll over unacceptable. Mongrels must remain on all fours. He planted a boot between the brute's shoulders and pushed. Down the Dung Eater went again. A vicious kick righted him onto his back. Once more another kept him there. Unwilling to give him another chance to rise or worse, he dove on the lunatic, grabbed him by the throat and held him fast. From there, he began to squeeze. Flailing fingers fumbled at his face, seeking purchase, trying to gouge out his eyes even as he strangled him. Naruto felt his temper spike to new heights. The gall of it all. Even now the BSTRD tried to taint him with those twisted hands. No more. He twisted his head, opened his mouth, felt something enter it, and crunch. He bit down with all the brutal force his Omen body possessed. Warm, fetid BLDs splashed across whiskered cheeks. The Dung Eater recoiled with a startled shriek. Naruto spat 3 fingers in his face and hunched over him with a wordless hiss, glaring into his eyes. He'd be certain this was the last thing he saw. "Nephew, no!" He could hear Godwin shouting at him to stop, but the words were distant, faint, muted as though spoken from a great distance. "This isn't who you want to be." Yes, it was. This was him. Exactly who he wanted to be in this instant. There could be no sparing someone like this. The dead cried out for vengeance. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, evil for evil. He doubled over the Dung Eater and glared at him, refusing to even dignify his protests with so much as a sound. The lunatic gasped at him, lone eyes rolling in his head as he rasped out his final breaths. Here at last he saw the truth of him, the reality of the man he'd tried to provoke. That ruined face twisted with a new emotion, one foreign to him. There it is. The formless mother hissed deep within him, savoring the Dung Eater's final moments. That's the look, the same one his victims. War, fear, but he doesn't get to go yet. He felt her presence reach out and seize the psyche of the addled man pinned beneath them. His punishment must be more severe. Incredulity reared its ugly head and Naruto balked. He should die. Death is a release, my dear champion. Would it not be more painful to have him suffer for all eternity? The Dung Eater felt her touch and recoiled. No, get out of my mind, out of my head. His fingers tightened around the madman's throat, drawing a wheeze from his victim. We should interrogate him. Find out who gave him that relic. The Dung Eater whimpered as astral fingers pried open his mind. T was a hooded shadow. They said they understood. They promised me power. I knew not their face. He was telling the truth. That much he could sense. It was tempting to press him further, to grind more words out of him. But that wasn't what the frenzied dead wanted. So long as he lived, so did they, bound to this realm by his defilement, by his very life force. They couldn't wait any longer. Most were maddened already. Even filled with rage as he was, he wished for their peace. Let them go to their rest. He could find his answers another way. Enough, he decided. We're killing him. The cycle ends here. As you wish. She didn't sound much pleased, but she didn't challenge him either. In that instant the Dung Eater rasped a word. 2 syllables babbled past his bruised lips. Monster. Oh, that was rich. Monster, was he? There was only one monster in this room, and it wasn't him. Naruto squeezed one last time with his hands and, heedless of his companion's palpable displeasure, twisted. An awful crack pervaded the air as he broke the Dung Eater's neck. In the same instant, the formless mother yanked at the miscreant's soul and shredded it to countless pieces. Any lingering spell of curse the madman might have left behind shattered the moment his spirit did. His control over the spirits broken as surely as his psyche. As one, countless voices cried out in relief, made free from their torment. It was the sweetest of music to his ears. Naruto stood with an effort, hands trembling, ears still ringing. There. The deed was done. He felt no guilt. Only release. Albedo reached him first, quick to latch onto his arm, and quicker still to check him over for wounds and any lingering curses that might have clung to him. Finding none, she drew a clean cloth from her satchel and began to clean his face, fretting over the mess he'd made. No words were spoken between them. None were needed. Her smile was enough. Others proved more critical of his accomplishment. You witless oaf, Ranny staggered over, clutching her ribs, and belatedly he realized she'd been the one he elbowed away earlier. Now we'll never know what he knew. Yet we have the artifact he stole. Godwin righted himself with a sigh, holding that foul wriggling thing in his good hand. Though I too wish you had given us a chance to question him. Naruto quirked a blonde brow their way. He was too dangerous to be taken alive. Forgive me, Godwin relented under his stare. I dislike killing and my health is not what it once was. Nevertheless, you slew a great evil here today. The world is well to be rid of his ilk. Naruto huffed to preserve the ruse. I didn't do it for you. Yet I thank you for it all the same. Oi. A new voice pierced the din behind them. Quit your jawin and lemme. Outta here already. BSTRD had me locked up. The voice had come from the very same cell the Dung Eater had stood before only a few minutes prior. Godwin and Rani exchanged a baffled look. The latter found her voice first. "I believe someone is speaking to you, nephew." When no one made a move towards the cell, Naruto realized the onus of choice had been moved upon him once more. Rolling his eyes, he stalked over to the door, grasped the bars, and wrenched it clear off its hinges. He saw a hunched shadow stir in the darkened chamber within. "Ah, fresh air." The voice came on. Again. "Smell was starting to kill me by itself. Soon enough he himself staring at, a short blue man. Thanks for saving my bacon back there." They drew themselves up with a grunt and stumbled to freedom. "I owe you one." "Although," said man leaned forward to squint at the blade hilt jabbed into his sash. "Sorry to say that old swords of yours is wrecked beyond fixin', though." Naruto blinked the last of the Omen rage away from his eyes. His sword? No, it was a lost cause. A quick glance confirmed it. He'd swung too strong and too fast, and subsequently the blade had paid the price. A shame. It hadn't been the best of blades, but it had served him well. He couldn't quite hide his smile as he stowed his ruined tool. "And you would know this how?" "Weapons are my life's work." The short man grinned. "You need a proper one, Yasanive batch." Something in the dwarf's crude speech heartened him. He spoke plain. He liked that. "You're an unconventional weaponsmith, aren't you? Bit of a foul mouth too." "Bah," came the grunt. "I ain't like my brother. Says it the ways I sees it." "You have a brother? Strong to imagine another one like him." "Eh?" A blue hand waved in dismissal. "Sindri's a squeamish little bugger. Don't much like touchin' dirty sight. S.Y. I'm down here rummaging around for materials, not him." "What manner of creature are you?" Albedo sniffed, then leaned back from the man and his acrid stench. "Some kind of dwarf?" I'm a dwarf, your ladyship." The short man squinted at her. "Name's Brock. You really ain't never seen a dwarf before." Her wings twitched happily. "Lady?" And just like that, the surly old dwarf won her over. "Well, you're definitely one of the prettier omens down here. So?" His gaze swept back to Naruto. "You want me to fix ya up a weapon or not?" He did, truth be told. But what manner of weapon would suit him? Not a sword, that was for certain. He could conjure spectral weapons well enough thanks to Morgoth's teachings, but they would only last for an instant. No, he decided, best to have something that would last. Stand the test of time. A spear or lance were brittle and would prove like to snap. What wouldn't? The answer came to him in a thunderclap. "Brock, was it?" He offered him his, and with a rueful smile. "All right, I'd like that very much." "Got anything in mind?" He paused, considered, decided. "I would prefer an axe. If you could enchant it with frost, that'd be great." "Great," the dwarf clapped his hands. "I've got just the thing." He darted back to the cell which, Naruto realized, wasn't a cell at all but a crude forge of sorts. He hadn't been able to tell with the fire extinguished. It came back to life now, bathing the room in a ruddy red glow as Brock went to work. "You two sit tight, and don't go making pig eyes at my spot here. I saw it first." Naruto guffawed outright, finding himself fond of the dwarf already. "Don't suppose you could craft us some armor while you're at it?" "Depends." Brock grinned. "Got anything to trade?" Naruto opened his cloak on one side, revealing some choice material he'd foraged just this afternoon. The dwarf whistled. "Well, ain't that a hoot? Gonna need more metal than that, though." Naruto eyed the dung-eater's body. "Melt his armor down, then you'll have plenty." Brock's grin turned feral. "Suppose I would. Seems fitting. It'll be good as new. None of that awful sit color to it. Deal." "I'd like for Albedo, too." "Sure," the dwarf shrugged. "Why the hell not? Gonna need her measurements, though." "Begging your pardon, my lord," Albedo coughed politely behind him before he could continue. "Your family seems to be having another argument." "Again?" Brock waved a hand. "Bah, this'll take some time on ya. Go chat with your godly friends. You know where to find me." Indeed. They did. Rani was raging again when they finally caught up to them. She'd drawn Godwin down a side passage when they weren't looking. Now she seemed intent on having it out with him over something or other. At first he couldn't rightly hear her as he drew near, so heated were her words. Her voice soon put paid to that. "Is a brute." She hissed furiously at Godwin, stabbing a finger into his chest. "A savage, and you would unleash him upon the Landel?" His uncle's face remained impassive. "I unleash nothing, and you would do well to remember your place, sister." Her pale visage closed down. As you wish. But know this. There will be a reckoning. He lifted his chin. When that time comes, I shall pay the price in full. She reared back. You mean to sacrifice yourself for his sake? Such is the duty of the strong. We must protect the weak. That boy is anything but weak. She's right, you know? Naruto raised his voice, making his presence known. I'm really not. Enough. Godwin shot Ranny a cross look. We did not come here to quarrel. He trailed off, clearly searching for the right words. Your aunt is somewhat cross, due to recent events. He found them quickly, much to Naruto's chagrin. With the Dung Eater's death, we lost any chance of knowing who supplied him with that relic. Godwin blew out a sigh. There is a possibility of a spy in our ranks, yes, of treachery perhaps, but we knew not who to trust, until now. Ranny stomped a foot, but didn't dignify his words with a response. Naruto had an inkling of his own. He didn't much like where this was going. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the two of you are innocent in this, if nothing else. Godwin prattled on. There is something I would ask of you, the both of you, and didn't that just set off every alarm in his head? But first I would have you understand things. Albedo beat him to the punch, had to ask. Do you suspect Morgott and Mogue of treachery? No. The answer was swift. Decisive. They cannot venture above as we do, and even projections have their limits. They would have been sighted in the city otherwise. Naruto felt his shoulders sag. You want something else, don't you? Out with it. I would ask for your help once more. Godwin turned to face him fully, face resolute. Come with us to the surface. Aid us in the finding the one responsible for this, so that we might avert a catastrophe. Do this, and I swear you need never return to the underground again. What's more, I shall see every Omen treated with decency when I take the throne. You have my word. Naruto reeled a little, head spinning at it all. You're offering an awful lot there. I wish to prove my sincerity. Is that so wrong, nephew? Ranny huffed. Do as you like. I care not a jot. She really does, Godwin said, drawing an outraged squawk from the redhead. Pay her no mind. Godwin, ignoring her, his uncle pivoted. That same sunny smile flashed forth once more. He offered him a hand. Well, nephew of mine, what say you? Morgott refused to allow it. In all honesty, Jidwin would have been disappointed if his little brother let them go to the surface without a fight. After all, it just wasn't any fun when everyone agreed with you from the get-go. The true challenge lay in convincing them, persuading them that your idea was their idea to begin. He'd won many such allies this way, both with and without his sliver tongue. Ah, but Morgott, dear brother Morgott, so strong, so stubborn, so suspicious in all things. Truly he had no ulterior motives toward the boy. Quite the contrary, he wished to protect him. Naruto was the key to everything, whether he knew it or not only to exposing whomever was behind the Dung Eater's mad rampage, but to saving the lands between as they knew it. For you see, he was the answer, he who the prophecy spoke of. Godwin had read the text in crumbling Farum Azula, seen the murals in Nokron, deciphered the tablets strewn about Lanedell. An Omen wearing a crown of horns much like those of young Naruto, would take the world. It was said he would marry the daughter of a serpent, that their descendants would be more numerous than the stars themselves, and while he didn't much understand that part of the prophecy, he could see the implications, if he could but steer that prophecy toward salvation instead of destruction. Take him to the surface? Never. His dear sibling slashed an arm between them, snapping him back to reality. I will not allow it. It has already been decided, brother of mine. Ah, dear Morgott, stubborn to the end, ever since they were children. He pitied him. This is a courtesy, nothing more. I have mother's blessing, it will be done. Worry not, it will only be for a short while. The lie came to his lips all too easily. Mother didn't know of this, nor did he have any intention of returning his nephew to this festering pile of soot. She would be as surprised as the rest. Mo of your prattle. Morgott's stony countenance said otherwise. You would take my boy, my only boy, bring him the surface, and for what? Fame? Fortune? Family? What happens when you bring him back? I shall tell you. He swept an arm between them, face darker than the storms of Stormvale itself. He will rebel. It is already all I can do to keep him in check, and you would unleash him upon the world. Anger sparked in Godwin's heart. He stomped it down and lifted his chin in smoldering defiance. I would give an innocent child a taste of freedom. Innocent? Morgoth barked a laugh. The boy is far from innocent. He has been touched by the formless mother. She whispers to him of BLD and wounds and death, yet you would unleash him upon the lands between even so. This wasn't solely about the boy, he could sense it. You truly believe your kind belong down here, don't you? His dejected sibling nodded firmly. I do. You do not? I do. Morgoth reaffirmed his words with a growl. Such is our lot in life. We deserve no less. And you speak of love and friendship. Illusions. He turned and hawked spit at his feet. If you truly cared for me and Moog, you would have saved us long ago. But no. Father buries himself in battle to hide his guilt. Mother pretends to rule. And you play the part of the savior when you only wish for death. His face fell. It saddens me that you think such. It is the truth. Morgoth drew his cane. I will not let you take my son. Godwin inhaled slowly, held his breath for a long moment, exhaled now. His doubts went with it. Yes, you shall. Godwin hadn't wanted to use this. He truly hadn't. He reached into his robe and withdrew a metal shackle. Morgoth saw it and recoiled. No, you wouldn't. I will. Godwin smiled sadly. I must. You leave me no choice. Morgoth turned to flee. Godwin squeezed the shackle, and all hell broke loose. Golden chains burst from the ground and bound Morgoth before he could hope to escape. Wrapping themselves round his arms and legs, they dragged him low to the ground despite his initial struggles, then lower still, all but smashing his face into the ground. Unable to muster the strength to rise or even reach for with his weapon, his little brother glowered at him hatefully. And now you show your true colors, Godwin the Golden. He strained his neck and spat at his feet. Godwin the Cruel, they should call you. The insult was a dagger, stabbing deep. Godwin hardened his heart to it. You shall remain bound here until such a time as you change your mind, my brother. He clutched the shackle tight and stowed it within his robe once more. The fate of the world is more important than your self-important delusions. Morgoth howled at him, and he spoke over the subsequent shouting. Worry not, you shan't die. I shall see that you are given food and water. His piece said he turned and walked away, if only to hide his tears. Godwin, he heard Morgoth rail against his bonds behind him. Godwin, do not leave me like this. You mustn't. Shadows fell across his face as he waded into the dark. He kept walking. Godwin, please, brother, I beg of you. Morgoth's shouts echoed in silence. Godwin. Could have sworn I heard something just now. Naruto craned his neck. He could have sworn he heard a shout just now. A wail of despair. Such were not uncommon down here in the underground, but that one sounded almost familiar. He strained his senses for it once more, listening intently to the best of his efforts. A harsh crack claimed his attention. Maul, savage! He whirled and shouted at a pair of horned brothers standing over another broken body. How many times do I have to tell you? Don't the new bloods like that? They need to be trained, not beaten within an inch of their lives. The shorter of the two shrugged. What does not kill them will only make them stronger, my lord. The formless mother hummed. He has a point. Blue eyes rolled in mild annoyance. So you say, is that one even alive? Savage kicked the corpse. It groaned. He will live. Honestly, you too, he flung up his arms. Look, just ease up a little while Albedo and I are gone. Yeah, I want to come home to a pack of trained warriors, not a pile of corpses. Maul and Savage looked between one another. Nodded. Now. The former bowed low. As you wish, my MSTR. And stop calling me that, his piece said. He stomped off to his chambers. Everything was awhirl, his mind even more so. He'd had to meet with his lieutenants, give them orders before he left, make preparations for his absence, if only because he didn't know how long he'd be gone. There were things to pack, words to say, goodbyes to be made. He had to make sure Albedo didn't accidentally maim someone, not to mention a shadow fell over him. Headed to the surface are we? Naruto looked back with a huff. Uncle Moog? Oh, and you brought Albedo. Indeed, I have. Worry not. Moog laid a hand on each of their shoulders, a surprisingly gentle gesture for one so large. I always knew this day would come. Sooner or later perhaps, but not this soon. I understand you'll be gone for quite some time. Albedo squirmed under his lone eye. It is as you say. For a moment, it looked like Moog might say something. At length he shook his head. Then take care. He knelt and drew them into a brisk hug. May the formless mother watch over and protect you both. I shall see you soon. His second preened a little, and to you as well. Naruto made to pull away when he released Albedo, only to find himself pinned beneath Moog's golden gaze. And a word of warning for you, my dear nephew. That lone orb held him fast. Don't dig too deep when my brother brings you to the surface. You might not like what you find. He leaned closer still now, words for his ears and his ears alone. I know what they buried, what caravan awoke in the dark. Shadow and flame. Remember, and beware. His next words were barely a whisper spoken on a thread of breath. All that glimmers is not gold. Lanedell was just so ... its people, less so. For all its great gilded radiance, men and women seemed to scorn his every step. Naruto ignored them, all too happy to see the light of day again. Above ground at long last. Not some flimsy projection where he couldn't taste or feel, let alone barely see. But as a living being, it felt good. Freeing. Like he'd finally come home in this strange second life of his. He'd almost forgotten what sunlight felt like. It was warm. So much better than a projection. Albedo looked even more lost than him. Indeed, the dark beauty clung tightly to his hand and glared heatedly at anyone who dared come near. He pitied anyone who tried to make friends with her. They'd be in for a rough time indeed. Still, he wasn't about to protest. Her clinginess here, holding her hand, kept his own from traveling. Desperate for a distraction, he let his gaze wander. It settled upon a large statue carved from white stone, representing an appealing woman in a flowing gown, the sun at her back. Her blank eyes seemed to stare into his very soul, as though some nameless, ageless being were watching him within the stone. A shiver shot down his spine. Huh, he murmured to himself. Nice statue. Ranni rolled her eyes. Nice, he says. How uncouth you can be. That is your grandmother. Godwin chortled softly. Queen Marika, the Eternal. You'll meet her soon. Grandmother? He had one of those, too? Perhaps even Godfrey if my Lord Father deigns to grace the capital with his presence. Unlikely, Ranni retorted waspishly. Last I heard he was squatting in Limgrave. Naruto blinked. Huh. He'd never really had grandparents before, not in the truest sense of the word. Jiraiya and Tsunade came to mind, not that he'd ever admit it. A man clad in dark blue robes awaited them at the main gate. Naruto took him in at a glance. Red of hair, with a beard and a fearsome scowl to match. He could have been related to Ranni for all he knew. He must have heard them coming, because he rounded on them when they were but a stone's sister. Ranni recoiled, somewhat taken aback by his presence. Rykard? Of course they were related. Just his luck. And what we hear. Serpentine golden eyes raked over him and Albedo. Omens? Curious. Father won't be happy to see them. Godwin hummed. This one's our nephew, actually. Is he now? A grim smile touched that stern countenance. Curious. Mother will be happy to know if nothing else. Ranni scowled. Marika is not our mother. She is, sister. Father is her other half, which also makes us BLD of her BLD. You simply refuse to see it. No matter. He turned, waving absently. Come along, nephew. The queen will want to see you and your consort. Albedo chimed, clutching at Naruto's elbow. Rykard barked. A laugh, a surprisingly pleasant sound. Consort, then, come along, children. There's much to do, and I would have us do it before the queen becomes aware of this excursion. Ranni huffed. Naruto heaved a sigh. Rykard, at least, seemed friendly. More than he could say for Ranni. Marika was, not as he expected. He'd been prepared to face some haughty beach on a throne, some wicked wench with an ego to match. This was not that. They found the eternal queen sprawled in her chambers half-naked, lazing in her bed with a book and cup of wine. She blew a stray strand of golden hair out her eyes and paid them no need, none at all, none whatsoever. An absolute giant of a man lay beside her, his back to them, snoring softly. Neither took notice of their little quintet at first, even when they entered the chamber. Godwin dropped to a knee ahead of them. I have returned, mother. Have you, now? The bored woman didn't look up from her book. What news? The dung-eater is dead. Excellent. Here at last she looked up, pinning them beneath her golden gaze. And who is this you have brought into my chambers? Godwin stood with a flourish and swept an arm back, revealing them to her. Your grandson, son of Morgoth, and his lady consort. Pardon. Marika leaned back. Blinked strong. I'm a grandmother. Why was I not told of this? Her gaze locked onto Naruto. Saw the truth. Swept now to the man still slumbering beside her. Godfrey, wake up. She slapped the man's chest. We have visitors. The behemoth grunted. Rolled over, blinking. Was that? And you, my dear, have a grandson. Pardon? I said you have a grandson. The ghost of a smile touched the queen's lips. Morgoth has a whelp, which makes you a grandfather. Are you going to lay there all day, or will you greet your BLD? The result was immediate. He absolutely blurred. Naruto found himself pinned in an instant. Whoa! Ha! I'm a grandfather. Yes, you are Anduawawa Marietiabs. The large man Godfrey surged to his feet and swept Naruto into his arms with a mighty laugh. This is wonderful, I must tell everyone. When Naruto had witnessed the blur that was the Elden Lord barreling towards him at speeds he could only just perceive, let alone track, a myriad of feelings had washed through the young Omen. It was truly amazing how much one's mind could emote in scant moments, but he was sure that the time it took between gut-wrenching apprehension at what he expected to be a haymaker to flabbergasted disbelief at the fact that for the first time in this new life he hadn't been able to truly react. It served as a solemn reminder that for all his power and the touch of an outer goddess, he was still growing into his own power, or it would have been had he not been knocked flat by the tonal whiplash of Godfrey, not lifting him onto his exceptionally broad shoulders and running a lap around the capital to announce his newly discovered grandfather status. Great power did not always go hand in hand with stoicism, he reasoned. But in the few days that had elapsed since his and Albedo's arrival in the capital of the lands between, the pale-haired young man had been met with a pleasant surprise. Leyndell was marvelous. Naruto hadn't a chance to truly appreciate it the first time around. He'd been shepherded by Godwin and Ranni, too concerned about Albedo, and what may or may not have been their impending executions. Golden lineage or no, he knew from one of Morgoth's many depressing diatribes that any adherent to the Golden Order was oath-bound to dash them against the rocks at first sight. Yet instead of an uncaring monarch of virtue, order and duty, Naruto had found Queen Marika, the eternal, a grandmother, one blessed with a divine body and power to shake the world, but still, a woman who would rather enjoy a goblet of claret and read a book. His existence to her had amounted to a pleasant conundrum. His eyes narrowed momentarily, pragmatism pushing through. He had had a goddess for a grandmother in his first life, and she had hardly been the most outstanding example of moral fiber. Bah, what the hell, he'd verify her actions later. For now he'd enjoy his time in this magical place. Now he had all the time in the world to see and stare, and so stare he did. Albedo looked lovely in a gown of white and gold, her bright eyes shining, ebony hair washed so well that it almost seemed to glisten in the sun, and the Erd tree. Ah, the Erd tree, that had been a sight to see and sense to feel. The glittering light of grace seemed to flutter around Albedo and her new raiment. He'd never seen someone so lovely and had accidentally said as much to her. As far as mistakes went, it wasn't a bad one. His fellow Omen was practically preening after that slip of the tongue. He knew Godwin needed his help to find whomever was behind the Dung Eater, to prevent more murders and the like. But it was just so strong to focus on that today. She looked so alive. Where should we go first? Albedo danced by in a swirl of silk. Should we visit the shops? Or perhaps the smithery? I know Brock is still working on that weapon of yours down below, but still, she kept talking, not giving him a chance to pipe up. Oh, maybe a bakery. There's so much to see and do. It occurred absently to Naruto that Albedo must have read about bakeries in some of the few books they had been able to salvage in the depths. She sashayed past him, hips swaying. His throat went dry and he shook his head to clear it. Don't get so far ahead, you know, he squawked, running a hand through the thicket of pale hair that sat around his horns. The ebony-haired Omen whirled around, pale face red as a beet, and effected a low bow. Forgive me, I let my emotions get the better of me again. It's fine, he waved a hand. I like this more girlish side of you. She looked away, fussing over her hair. I see, I shall endeavor to become an abject Stepford when you need it, she exclaimed earnestly. HRK. Then she was gone again, racing past. He held a hand out but pulled back, spotting the movements of the outlying guards moving to keep up with her. Did knowledge that these guards would not strike out at them really embolden her so? The formless mother tutted in his head. It is no sin to cling to that which makes us happy. Naruto couldn't even bring himself to blame her. With Marika's blessing and guards to protect them, they were free to wander where they wished. Within reason, of course. Many a passerby still sneered, but none dared speak against either Omen. Not with great Godfrey himself looming over them all with Sarash on his shoulder. That said, Godfrey had proven to be quite an enthusiastic grandfather. Come, his grandsire boomed a laugh. This way, for someone who only recently had discovered that his wayward son had sired a child, Godfrey was taking to the position like a fish to water. In other words, overzealous in his role to the point of embarrassment for all those around. He wanted to show them everything the capital had to offer, and today that included something he had never experienced in this life, nor the one that preceded. A royal parade. After making their way through the multitude of Quaba-adorned structures that littered the capital, gilded flowers atop marble stems, the Omen prince, his winged consort and elden grandfather had been ushered through a series of illusory gates to better reach where they needed to be. The gates were only supposed to be used by the fifth and second estates of clergy and nobility, but the symbol of the Eternal Queen and snarling visage of Sarash had dissuaded any of the particularly prejudiced guards or priests from blocking their path, so they made it through the city in a record time. Even more so given the heaving throng of lesser folk that were apparent by their noise. Walking through a pillared skyway across a tributary of the great river of pedestrian traffic, Naruto let out an appreciative whistle. Even on this smaller road, the tide of pedestrian traffic was at least 50 wide and many hundreds deep before disappearing around the bend. A far cry from the depths. My boy? Godfrey questioned, peeking down at Naruto, 3 feet in height and one spectral lion separating them. That was putting it mildly. A far cry and then some, old man, he replied, looking over the people, their passage obscured by layers of illusion. The most Omen you ever see in one place is, he paused, considered his words, then thought better of giving an exact number. More than you'd think, but less than this. A truth, albeit obfuscated. The reality was that the number of Omens in the depths was far, far higher than anyone knew. After all, when the lands between had been flushing their Omen kin into the sewers for eons, they were going to find solace in one another, the ones that hadn't been gelded at BRTH anyway. The horned youth's face darkened. The atrocities that had been committed against his kind were without number, and it was a horrifying thing to earnestly admit that the only thing that kept their population in check was a combination of murdering each other over scraps and the suicide rate. Sarash warbled thoughtfully, Godfrey nodding curtly in turn, respecting his grandson's privacy for now. It must have been a harrowing place to grow, but you survived it, and for that you must be strong. Something few here can honestly say, he muttered the last for only his ears to hear. Do you like it here? Naruto asked, curious of the man that was the strongest mortal in the world. I can't say I don't love the capital, young grandson. The Elden Ring is close at hand, and all its glow and splendor are what I earned. But, as the saying goes, strong times breed strong men breed easy times breed soft men, and soft men breed strong times. Naruto finished, looking up at the bearded man. The Elden Lord smiled, pleased with the answer and show of light defiance, likely used to people being in sniveling deference to his power. Passing into an annex, a wash of noise and the rumble of endless steps fell over them, and they arrived at a grand stand. It was several stories in height and formed from hundreds of metal and wooden vines painted a sumptuous gold and arranged into a stand that ascended in tiers, the top of which were covered by silk coverings to shade the occupants, all bearing the sigil of the Erd Tree. Albedo's wings flapped happily. She was clearly enraptured by the spectacle and waited for Naruto and Godfrey to come level with her. Oh, my lord Naruto, they have set out a stand befitting of your arrival, she exclaimed. Naruto cringed internally while Godfrey boomed a laugh that shook the stairs, slowly ascending them. An earnest assumption, but a tad off the mark, young Omen. Thy dedication to the gratification of thy consort should be most lauded. But nay, today is but a trooping of the color from visitors and vassals. As the trio and their entourage of guards ascended the steps, Godfrey explained that Langdell and Marika's dominion was known of world over, and it was something well worth marking from other kingdoms and fiefs, as well as other nations marking their respect to the Eternal Queen. Reading between the lines, Naruto was able to see this for what it was. His grandfather wished to show them the standard of life which he was entitled to as a descendant of the golden lineage. Arriving at the tiered landings at the top of the grandstand, they were privy to a spectacular view of the main thoroughfare that ran from the gates of Lanedale and along most of the city, hedged on both sides by tens of thousands of people, all giving their praises to the royal family of demigods. 3 landings were arranged in a trio of tiers, with one rising above the other 2 by a slight gradient, each festooned with several thrones, numbering 8 in total, all save one with a smaller secondary throne. Of the 8, only 3 were currently occupied, the largest and most splendid of them all belonging to Marika, who relaxed into its obsidian and golden pillows with a golden goblet in her hand that she sipped from. Spotting Godfrey and her grandson, she graced them with a magnificent smile and small nod of acknowledgement. To her left sat Godwin in a smaller, but no less plush throne. He sent a pleasant wave Naruto's way, which the horned youth returned. Lastly, Ranni sat in a throne of her own, several seats down marked with glintstone and a darkened moon. The haughty redhead gave Naruto a sideways glance before turning her nose up with a pout. "Quite the view, isn't it?" Godfrey said, leaning his axe against his own throne before indicating a comparatively simple throne roughly the size of Ranni's next to Godwin's. "Your throne, dear grandson." Walking along the line of thrones with Albedo in his shadow, Naruto looked upon each seat as he passed it, quickly realizing that the smaller adjacent seats were for consorts before arriving at the one he had been shown to. It was carved from a rich mahogany with black LTHR quilted upholstery and a pair of ivory horns poking from either post that framed the back of the chair. Across the apex of the chair, carved deep into the mahogany, he read the carved but faded names set into the wood. Morgott, his father's throne. Slowly easing himself into it, Naruto set his mind awhirl, a deluge of thoughts and scenarios at work in his mind. There was meaning here, in this placement, in this moment. A lowly Omen from under the world sitting in his father's throne, overlooking allies and enemies alike. If Morgott was an Omen, why keep his throne? If they had confined Morgott and Moog to the sewers at their BRTH for being Omens, why would Marika and Godfrey be so easy in seemingly welcoming him and Albedo into the fold? There was so much at work here, but he would not be a patsy to machinations and fate. He would bring about change by his own means. Albedo sat beside him in her consort's throne, wings gathered behind her for extra cushioning. Her hand came to rest over his. What happens now? Now, Naruto leant forward, a chorus of Karinks signaling the beginning of the parade. We see that which we shall overcome. A parade is a strange thing. It was a banal statement, but one that held much truth when one sat down to consider it. Hundreds if not thousands of troops, performers and musicians, many of whom had never met before or would ever meet again, gathering together to play for the adoration of those that looked on at them. This served 3 purposes, diametrically opposed in their intent, but the same in their execution: entertainment, inspiration, and intimidation. Appropriately then, the procession was headed by clergy and warriors of the Golden Order, a block of them in white and gold. Their front line was 24 men and women, half of which waved burning incense burners, and the other half bearing gleaming silver and gold partisans at parade rest. As they advanced, the clergy hummed ancient hymns in a susurrus of prayer to Marika. The white smoke frothed from the alloyed censers, while the warriors of the church began to twirl their partisans in hypnotic movements. Then came the soundscape, for while the initial impetus had been heralded by the haunting call of the Karniks, the Golden Order's apostates hefted looping horns from which hung Erdtree streamers, filling the air with glorious tenors of sound. "What a racket," Albedo said, her face implacable. "They should be bearing your banners. It's an insult to head a parade in your honor with the banners of those who would see you ground to pulp." Despite the words that might have been spoken in a tone so sweet it might have induced diabetes, and the words themselves being heresy of the highest order, she actually drew an exhalation of laughter from Marika. "They are a tad stuffy, and I rather the strings than the horns, but they bow their heads to me, and in doing so show they are lesser. But lesser is not without worth. The mightiest ziggurat cannot stand without those that support it." Marika introspected, illuminated by the light of the Erdtree. The banter between goddess and Omen was drier than a desert and thrice as harsh for those who couldn't read the room. But the assembled demigods and golden lineage were instead focused on the endless stream of people, Godfrey grinning at the militaristic thump of drumbeats and lockstep. His own troops were decked out in full parade regalia, gleaming steel polished to mirror shine, and marched to the perfect beat of their outlying war drummers. Despite himself, Naruto found himself fascinated by the coordination of hundreds of drummers who did not have sheets to refer to notes. Hands clad in segmented cestus spanned fur-tipped drumsticks, as if it was as easy as breathing, rattling out complicated and uplifting percussion that made the horns of the Golden Order seem like a mournful dirge. And on the procession went, ranging from Lanedale's local guard, serving as vanguard for a 4th in Horse cavalry parade, adding the clopping of iron-bound hooves to the swelling of sound. Then came something much more interesting to Naruto's perspective. Visitors from foreign lands. The samurai of Ashina were a full coterie 100 strong and wore familiar Kabuto-style samurai armor, yumi bows, and the familiar curved blades of katana and takai worn sheathed at their sides. As they passed in impeccable lockstep, their leader, a scarred gentleman in a pale blue kimono and gold kabuto helmet, saluted the Eternal Queen. Naruto was transfixed, after so many years in the sewers in a world he knew not his own. It was oddly bizarre to see a familiar sight from his old world. More foreign nations and principalities admitted their members, each bringing its own unique sight and sound to the parade, but as more and more groups moved past, it truly began to set into Naruto just how much power Lanedale wielded, how many nations paid them respect. The Onion Knights of Katarina, the giant slayers of distant Dranglake, Astora, Lordran, the vile bloods of Canehurst and scholars of Bergenroth. It went on and on and on. Through all of it, Godwin the Golden watched his nephew with intrigued eyes and an easy smile. He was glad things were going so smoothly, because his own actions he had had to do to poor Morgott to bring Naruto to his home. The Golden Prince was glad that he seemed to be enjoying himself, so it was with supreme willpower that he kept his composure when a shadow reared up from the shade cast by his throne. It was not something he could truly see, not anyone could see, but he knew it was there through its connection to death, a darkness that cast a shadow on the bleakness of oblivion. You should have left the Omen in the sewers. He intrudes upon things he does not understand. A voice spoke from the dark. Godwin did not speak in response, instead subtly manipulating magic in the air to emulate speech for the thing to hear. He does so on my behalf. You overreach yourself, Godwin. Do not meddle in the chain of fate. And just like that it was gone, leaving Godwin with a feeling of foreboding. He blinked away with an easy smile, not noticing that his mother's gaze had briefly drifted to his shadow. A grand fanfare shifted everyone's focus, and all the members of the royal family sans Naruto brightened, the horned youth raising a pale eyebrow in interest. Down below, at the head of a small army of figures clad in blue and red armor, rode 4 figures on horseback. One was huge, a maintain of a man donning lion-themed armor and a plume of verdant red hair, twin black steel greatswords slung across his back. His immense bulk was sat upon an impossibly small horse, but the little steed, scrawny as he was, offered no complaint. Naruto wondered how the little creature could support the mountain of a man, but his keen eyes spied a glow of purple around his stirrups. At his side rode another man in his late 30s, austere and regal, but not without a level of jovialness to his bearded face. Even at this distance his serpentine orange eyes picked out the denizens of the royal entourage, and Rani inclined her head. Behind the 2 men rode a man and woman, both tall and refined, one a truly appealing woman with a narrow aristocratic face and tall crown, while the other was a redhead like his apparent son's, only his eyes were the same gold as Marika's. All the pieces fell into place in Naruto's mind as he looked over the missing thrones. Finally, the demigods, his family, had assembled. Now, things would get interesting. This really was the life. Even now, Naruto couldn't quite comprehend his good fortune. Words alone couldn't even begin to describe the luxury in which he lived. He had a bed. An actual bed with sheets and covers, one that wasn't infested with lice or mice. Clean clothes without holes in them, and food that wasn't spoiled. He could sleep in as late as he wanted, and never have to fear for his life or those he had taken under his protection. No need to sleep with one eye open here, and it was glorious. The formless mother hummed in his head. Feels nice, doesn't it? It did. More than he wished to admit. This strange second life of his had led through countless twists and turns, but it felt like he'd finally found himself better for it. Why would Morgott Dad ever want to keep him and Albedo away from this? He never wanted to go back to the sewers, though he knew he might have to one day. Which begged the question, did he want to? My lord, a little. Lower. He looked across the room. Albedo snored daintily in her cot across from him, dead to the world. What kind of dream was she having to smile like that? He chuckled softly and ran a hand through her hair. She made a pleased noise in her sleep and rolled over to clutch at his hand. His fingers traced her horns, drawing a small shiver through her. He hoped it wasn't one of fear. She, at least, deserved this life. A knock echoed at the door. Naruto looked up, expecting Godwin. Time to face the music. Then, he'd known this was coming. He was on the surface for a reason. It was art of his deal and H-tier was work to be done. If he had to sing for his supper, so be it. He'd play their game and help them find the Dung Eater's allies, for now. Come in. The door swung open. Naruto blinked quickly. That was not Godwin. A rather grim-looking man entered in his stead, clad in dark robes of blue and black. His was a stern face with gleaming golden-green eyes, framed by impressive red hair and a magnificent beard besides. He stood there in the doorway for a long moment, considering him intently as one might a priceless artifact. He vaguely recognized him from the parade, but the man's name escaped him. Discomfited by the intensity of his stare, he found his voice at last. "Can I help you?" "Very well." The stranger spoke after a long pause. "You'll do." His brow furrowed. "Do for what?" "Rykard," Godwin bustled in after him, looking positively aggrieved. "I told you not to rush ahead." Albedo rose blearily behind him, rubbing at her eyes. "So noisy? I merely wish to meet my nephew." The now-named demigod replied, heedless of her sleepy stare. He noticeably made no mention of him being an Omen. "I have a daughter nearly of an age with you." "Well, wasn't that interesting? Someone his and Albaud's age?" "You have a daughter?" "I do," Rykard preened. "Her name is Raya. Would you like to meet her?" Albedo bridled behind him. He most certainly would not. "I would, actually." She winced. Godwin proved more vocal in his protest. "Rykard." "What?" The younger demigod blinked. "I'm being subtle." "This is not subtle. This is exactly the opposite of subtle. Seems Ranni was right about you. We need to keep the bloodlines pure. And his," he flung a finger at a now baffled Naruto, "is royal, despite what those tittering twits in the capital might say." Godwin turned an apologetic look on him. "Forgive him, he's always been rather blunt." "For which I make no apologies." Clearly, Marika's eldest pinched the bridge of his nose. Naruto knew the look well. It was that of a man trying to stifle a migraine. "I'm sorry, nephew." His smile was decidedly straight. "I had intended to summon you to my study, but it seems someone," he cast a baleful glare Rykard's way, "had other plans." Rykard offered an utterly unapologetic shrug. "The boy's only been here a few days. Give him and his woman time to acclimate before you throw them headfirst into your witch hunt." Godwin rolled his eyes. "I suppose you'll want him to see Radon as well when he returns from his campaign." "Yes." The youngest of the demigods granted him a limpid smile. "Mother will want to meet him in the interim before I take him to Mount Gelmir." "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" Why did it feel like he'd become a pawn in a game he wasn't properly prepared for? The formless mother hushed his fears. "With me, you will be..." "The machinations of mere demigods, no offense meant to thee, are nothing compared to the interstellar intrigues I play with my brothers and sisters." "Perish the thought, Godwin," Rykard was saying as he came back to himself. "I harbor only the best intent for our nephew." Godwin squared up to him, golden gaze gleaming with lightning. "Yet you are keeping him from helping me." "I am teaching him how to live, brother," Rykard retorted. "Or have you forgotten?" Something terrible flashed across Godwin's face for a moment. He quelled it with a smile not a moment later. "Perhaps you're right." He planted a hand on his shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow, nephew. Enjoy your day off." Naruto could feel his head was spinning from the byplay between them, but he rallied and perked up. "So, where are we going, and what are we doing, exactly?" "I," Rykard replied with a stiff upper lip and a stern look Godwin's way, "am taking you to meet the rest of your family post-haste, despite a certain workaholic's protests." "Just a moment," Godwin interjected quickly. "Might I borrow Albedo while you're gone? There are things I wish to discuss with her." Albedo looked like she wanted to go with him, but he accepted the olive branch for what it was. Godwin had been nothing but kind and supportive. Who was he to deny him? He was clearly eager to track down whomever had supplied the Dung Eater with that accursed artifact, if only to prevent more chaos. That was good of him. Go right ahead. Albedo had deferred to him and held her tongue until this moment. No longer, for she rounded on him. My lord? Why did she sound so startled? You're better at hunting than I am. I'll see you tonight, she faltered, eyes downcast. Ah yes, of course. As you wish. Come. Reichard planted a hand on his shoulder and steered him toward the door. I shall take you meet my mother first. Huh? I thought we were going to meet Raya? All in good time, my boy, in good time. Reichard whisked him from the room before he could contemplate it further. He couldn't help but think back to Godwin's expression. For a moment there, he'd almost looked angry. Surely he'd imagined it. Hadn't he? What followed would soon prove a whirlwind. Naruto pouted throughout it all, an action that seemed bizarrely cute to an outsider given his horns. Not so to him. Not here. Not now. When he'd first laid eye on the Carrion Queen, amidst the totality of martial and arcane might, he had thought Renala to be a cool and aloof beauty, only to be blindsided. But just how motherly she was. Reichard's mother tutted softly, running a comb through his messy tresses. Dear boy, you simply must take better care of your hair. He'd never really had someone brush his hair before. It felt strangely nice. How are you so nice? Ranny's such a, she smiled. Brat? That, the queen giggled, weaving a ribbon into his hair. Finding someone able to match you tends to curb your delusions of grandeur, little Culver. Naruto scoffed. I'd think myself a shrike. Nonsense, while you may not be a dove, you are hardly the bird of torture. He winced. You don't know me. I know you never knew a mother's love, Renala hummed sincerely. So little one, before we decide what bird you shall be, let me give you wings, after we fix that hair. He tugged at the blue cloth she'd woven into his hair, tearing it free. Fine, but no ribbons. The formless mother giggled in his head. It suits you, it most assuredly did. Not. Reichard observed his plight with a faintly bemused expression from his perch against the wall. Best let her get it out of her system. But I want to see Raya. Is that so? Renala cooed. She looked to Reichard and a gleam of understanding passed between the two of them. You're off to see my dear granddaughter, are you? Then by all means don't let me keep you. Shall I send you to Mount Gelmir with a spell? That got a curious look from him. You could use magic to fast travel in this realm. Good to know. Reichard bowed his head. We would appreciate it, mother. It would save us some time. Then by all means, dear boys, come closer, and do hold still. The volcano manor lived up to its namesake. Nestled in the very heart of Mount Gelmir, it was large indeed, and the interior very red. Bright scarlet flames sizzled from multiple braziers mounted into the walls, casting eerie dancing shadows across the hall. A roaring hearth awaited them as they neared the foyer, tapering off into a parlor on the right before leading into a rather wide staircase on the left. From this angle, he could just see another hall in his peripherals, hidden by large gaudy crimson curtains. Low voices issues from within, impossible to discern. Reichard spoke up, distracting him. My thanks for humoring me, nephew. I know you'd rather be resting. Sure, Naruto waved his concerns away. Don't mention it. It's just... Reichard paused just shy of the threshold and looked his way. Just... You really don't have a problem with me being an Omen? His uncle granted him a grave look. I do not. Curiosity reared its ugly head. Why? Because there is power in perception. He patted his horns between his hair, looking unused to delivering such physical affection. It helped humanize him. In his eyes, somehow. Would you believe there was once a time when people scorned for my serpentine gaze and pallid demeanor? Even now my adversaries whisper harsh denunciations behind my back. And it doesn't bother you? No. The praetor shook his head. It does not. A blonde brow rose, practically climbing into his hairline. How? Simple. Never forget who you are, nephew. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like an armor, and it can be never used to hurt you. Wise words. He'd endeavor to remember them. Naruto. He looked back to Reichard. The Inquisitor stared high down. Be good to my daughter. What kind of question was that? Of course he'd be nice to her. I'll be on my best behavior, no worries. oddly enough, that seemed to mollify the man. His piece said, his uncle led him within at a brisk pace. He paused just over the threshold. "Raya?" His low voice in a baritone as they entered. "Where are you?" Noise arose from the stairs on the left. "Here, Tilda." A darling girl clad in a long green dress barreled down the stairwell at speed. As he looked on, she tripped over the hem of said dress, righted herself at the last second, and somehow kicked off a wall to launch herself their way like a heat-seeking arrow. Naruto barely had time to glimpse golden hair pleated back in a long flowing braid and piercing green eyes. Then she was past, throwing herself at Rykard with a delight squeal. He thought to shout a warning, but his uncle surprised him once again. Much to his surprise, the magnanimous monarch caught her beneath the arms with surprising grace, spun once to bleed off momentum, then set her down. "Hello, father," she beamed up at him, all sunshine and smiles. "How was your trip?" Naruto's jaw popped open. How could someone so terrifying have a daughter like this? She must take after her mother. "It went well." By contrast, his response was practically taciturn. "I trust you're faring well?" She nodded back, then paused, noting him at last. Her head tilted to the left a little. "Who's this? He looks familiar." Rykard steered her towards him. "Morgoth's son, the one I told you of. I'll let him introduce himself." Her eyes lit up all over again. "Does that make him my cousin?" A nod. "It does indeed. Where is your mother?" "Downstairs, praying." Naruto opened his mouth to speak. And just like that he found himself the center of her attention once more. Raya didn't move. She absolutely blurred. One moment she was standing the opposite him, holding her father's hand. In the next she crossed the distance between them in an instant, kicking up a small breeze in her wake. "Hello, Tilda, I'm Raya, and—" "You are?" He laughed a little bemused by her energy. "Naruto." Comprehension dawned in her eyes. Toward what, he knew not. "Oh, so you really are the one. Aunt Ranny mentioned you, Beach." At the mention of his aunt he twitched and forced a smile that he didn't entirely feel. "Did she, now? Only nice things, I hope." "She called you a horned reprobate and a rascal." Raya replied, "All innocence and butterflies." The smile thinned. "Really? How very kind of her." "She also said I should stay well away from you." Naruto felt his smile crack further. "I see. But you seem so nice, so she must be wrong." "I'm Raya." Her pale face flushed with shame a moment later. "Oh, but you already know that, don't you?" A hand rose to scratch at the back of her head. "Sorry, I'm not very good at this." "It's fine." What else could he say to that? Sensational. She took hold of both his hands still at his sides and pumped them up and down, arms flailing. "It's so very nice to finally meet you. Do you like games?" He took one hand from hers and rubbed two fingers together, conjuring up a scarlet spark. "I know a few." "Ooh," her eyes lit up, even as she still clung to his. "Othrand. You know magic, too. We can swap spells." Wild, excitable girl. If only he had half her energy. "I like her." Naruto rolled his eyes at the formless mother. "You would." He could feel Rykard watching them, his parental gaze searing down the back of his neck. "Let's play hide and seek." Raya took him by the hand and tugged him toward the stairs. "Come on, I know some great hiding places." Mildly bemused by her behavior, Naruto let her drag him away. Just like that, he was lost. Some might call that an omen, a portent of the distant future yet to come. And it was, although he didn't yet know it, an omen of marriage. "I see you've met Raya." Naruto scratched the back of his head. "That obvious?" Godwin steeped his fingers atop his desk, leaned forward, and smiled at him. "You have a mark on your neck." Heat speared up the back of his neck, turning his face a ruddy rose red. In that instant he found himself inordinately grateful he'd remembered to close the door behind him, because the resultant shout that followed filled his uncle's chambers and practically rattled the room. "Where?" he whirled, patting himself down frantically. "I swear I didn't feel her bite me." His uncle's grave countenance cracked in a smile. "I jest, nephew jerk." Godwin's pale visage was simultaneously the soul of discretion and the very picture of a good uncle. One irked him, the other left him slightly suspicious. If he didn't know better, he would have sworn the older demigod was deliberately having him on. Perhaps this was just his way of getting his own back. At him for Rykard spiriting him away the other day. Whatever the case, he genuinely seemed to have the very best intentions for the lands between and Omen alike. Whether those interests aligned with his own remained to be seen. Be nice if he stopped laughing, too. If you're quite done teasing me, what do you need? Straight to business, then? The demigod hummed, nodded his approval. I can respect that. How do you feel about getting your hands dirty? He winced. That was a leap he wasn't prepared for. You want me to kill someone? What? No. Godwin's face flashed with horror, and he shut him down just as quickly. Not at all. Nay, nothing of the sort. He sank back into his seat, palming his face. I misspoke. Forgive me. I merely meant you might be headed to some rather unsavory places in my stead. A blond brow arched his way. More unsavory than a sewer. Point taken. His uncle winced strong enough for the both of them. That was rather tactless of me, wasn't it? I merely meant to say there are areas you can go freely traverse where I cannot. Questions you can ask that would be answered by many where mine wouldn't. Make no mistake, the Dungeeter did not act alone. Someone was backing him, using him, as some say I am you. His eyebrow climbed higher still. Your words, not mine. I know. Godwin granted him the grave ghost of a smile. Your life holds great value to me, dear nephew. You are not simply an asset, regardless of what many would have you think. You are family. We share the same blood, and I will not let you come to harm while I have life left in me. But this fiend, his right hand squeezed into a fist and thumped the desk. He clearly cares not for the lives of his fellows or anyone else. The depths of his depravity truly knows no bounds. Clearly, anyone willing to use that vicious villain to enact their schemes needed to be put down, and strong. But it begged the question. I still don't see what you want me to do. Godwin tapped the divot in his desk, idly tracing it with one finger as though it held the secrets of creation. The Dungeeter's patron will doubtless have realized his failure by now. They've likely gone to ground. But there have been whispers of someone trying to pawn off a powerful artifact. They will try again, of that much we can be certain. Here at last, he raised his gaze, which is why I will be appointing you my personal hand in this matter. You will speak with my authority in all things. He perked up at that. Like your shadow, then. Ha! Godwin barked a wry laugh as sharp as it was poignant. You might well receive one if the America convinces the Two Fingers to deem you Empyrean, but no. Something sad flashed across his face. My shadow died defending me when I was very young. It is something I would rather not speak of. Come here. He drew out a map from his desk and beckoned, to which Naruto found himself reluctantly obeying, crossing to his side. His uncle indicated a circle drawn in red in. Your destination will be down in the lower city, or more aptly, a BRTHL known as the Goddess Embrace. His face flushed and Godwin must have seen it, because that wan smile of his returned. Do try not to sample the wares while on duty. Although, and here his eyes did sparkle, if you see fit to give Godfrey a great-grandchild or two, I'm sure he'd be most pleased. An elbow sank into his side. Godwin accepted it with a good-natured grunt and barreled on. In all seriousness, I will warn you once again, nephew. You may have spent most your days down in the sewers, but Lanedale, for all its supposed finery, is a beast apart. Thou shalt never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. You must be cautious. I will be. Who or what am I looking for? Whom? Godwin tapped the red circle. I have 2 agents there stationed in the Embrace already, but they are blunt instruments at best and not suited for delicate work. They last reported having seen the Dungeeter there and have been silent ever since. He had a bad feeling about this. How blunt we talking about here? Very blunt. A rueful smile tugged at the corner of the older man's mouth. You will know them by the names of Fort and Lan. There was something about those names just now, and then Godwin dropped the other shoe. And yes, before you ask, they're short for Fortisax and Lanseeks. Even he knew those names. You have 2 disguised dragons, ancient dragons, poking about in the lower city. Yes. And you didn't think Hat was a bad idea? Godwin tilted his head. No? Well, it is, for crying out loud. No wonder they hadn't caught the Dungeeter's patron yet. When all you have is a hammer, every problem starts looking like a nail. It was easy to think of light that way, tempting even. He spoke from experience on that front. Sure, it might feel nice to throw one's weight around, but it defeated the purpose more often than not. Sometimes you could solve problems by talking things out, or just offering someone their heart's longing. 2 dragons in a BRTHL didn't sound like his idea of a good time. All the more reason for you to hurry then. He twitched. You're some kind of a hole sometimes. You know that, Godwin shrugged. If I appear so, then I apologize. One makes do with the allies one has. I wish you luck in this endeavor. And that's the long and short of it. Well done, dearest nephew. Moog's spectral image considered him, bathed in red light. You seem to be settling in nicely. Naruto palmed his face. Against my better judgment, how are things down there? Feral and savage are training up. The new bloods, per your instructions. Any deaths? None to speak of. A blonde brow rose. Explain. The aging Omen tapped his trident against the floor and preened a little. Maul has been strict with his brothers, and I have seen to them personally. While it goes against my principles, I am quite capable of healing as well as harming. Nothing short of death will keep this lot down. Several of them have already crafted their sabers of BLD light and sworn allegiance to the formless mother. Her was rewarded by a happy squeal in his head. Yea, new devotees, my congregation grows. Naruto hid a smile behind his hand. You dropped the royal act for a second there. Did I? Dear disciple, I know not what you mean. Cagey girl. He clasped both hands behind his back, straightened up, steeled his heart, and asked the question he'd been dying to know, yet dreading all the same. How's Dad? Moog winced but a little. Your father is ... indisposed at the moment. Uncle. What would you have me say? Moog rolled a bony shoulder. Why, you know he did not wish you to go to the surface. Godwin spoke with him. They quarreled. To tell you any more would only wound you. As your favorite uncle, I wish to spare you that pain. All right, he recognized a warning. When he here wondered. Maybe he was better of not knowing some things. Ignorance was bliss after all. Do you think Godwin has our best interest at heart? The one-eyed Omen his horn chin. In the time that Morgott and I knew him, Godwin has ever believed in himself at the very least. That doesn't answer my question. He isn't the sort to act with malice toward another, if that's your concern. Moog leaned forward, one spectral hand clasped before his face in a stage whispers. Far from it. He believes all are equal in life, just as they are death. Just ask his consort, Thea. Odd woman, that one. I've never seen someone so devoted to the concept of dying as much as her. That was news to him. Godwin has a consort. Mo blanched. I've already said too much. Trust in the formless mother. She won't lead you astray. His brow twitched. Uncle, she is literally a MSCST. Who gets off on punishing people, she spluttered incoherently in his head. You take that back. Am I wrong? Relatively astray then. His old uncle sighed, utterly missing their byplay, though perhaps that was for the best given the formless mother's nature. Stay safe, nephew, and do let me know how things progress. His head bowed once more, hiding the hint of a fanged smile therein. Be assured, I shall take good care of your father in the interim. Perhaps when you meet again he might be in a better mood to receive you. Oi, that sounds kinda ominous, fare thee. Well, he cut the connection before he could finish. Naruto slumped with a sigh. All right, time to sing for his supper. But first. He paused just before the door leading to Albedo's room and gathered his courage. Right, then. He could do this. Just come out and say it. Hey, I'm going to a BRTHL. Wanna come? Because that would work so well. He wasn't sure if she'd be amused or outraged. Both? No, there was no point in delaying. If he tried to sneak out alone, he knew Albedo would absolutely throw a fit. Whereas if he told her his intentions, she'd probably sulk, but insist on tagging along, if only to protect his purity. Drawing himself up, he nothing ventured, nothing gained. Steeling himself, he grasped the handle and swung the door pen. He found her within, back to him. Raya sat beside her, braiding Albedo's hair. That was something of a miracle in and of itself. Not only that she was here in Lanedale, but the fact that Albedo hadn't tried to skin her alive yet. She didn't let anyone touch her hair. Rarely him, even. That she'd let Raya near hers, well, that was surprising, and hopefully a good omen. That said, her hair shone today. She'd threaded it in the style of Marika, with a silver tiara nestled against her raven-black locks, the better to show her forehead and highlight her curved horns. He felt his heart hitch a little. She looked lovely, dare he say. Raya looked up, saw him. Then gasped. So much for his moment of reflection. Cousin, his eyes widened. Whoa, Salutations. She launched herself at him at full speed. There was nothing else for it. He pivoted at the last second, caught the excitable girl by her waist, whirled around, and spun her down to safety. The moment he did, she latched onto him and nuzzled her head against his chest, humming happily under her breath. If he didn't know better, he could have sworn she was hissing happily. Sure, it was his imagination. He didn't have much time to dwell upon that, because she was looking to him. Again now, eyes sparkling. How have you been? He patted her head. You literally just saw me the other day. So I did. She touched a hand to her cheek and beamed up at him. It's only been a day, but it feels like forever, months, even. That settled it. He had to marry this adorable, ditzy girl, too. Nothing else would do. Where are we going? A puzzled frown writ his face. Well, Raya rambled. Father said it's dangerous to go alone, and that I should accompany you. So I teleported here. But then Lady Albedo found me and said she feared for your chastity, so I just had to do her hair and make it look pretty, you see. Because she looked so sad, he snapped his fingers. Raya, focus. Right. She grinned up at him. So, where are we going? Again with the we. Oi, don't take fault with her, my lord. Albedo drew herself up, the very picture of deadly poise once more. I was the one who brought the matter to her attention. Really, the nerve of that godwin, demanding you visit a BRTHL. Wait just a second without me. She flung up her arms with a huff. Did he not realize those foul harlots would try to woo you? Naruto's brow shot into his hair. He hadn't mentioned the BRTHL yet, much less broached the subject. In an instant, everything CLC'd into place. His brow slammed back down. You were spying on me, weren't you? They must have used a scrying spell, the clever girls. Albedo didn't deign to deny it. Raya simply smiled at him. Shall we go? 2 omens and a princess walk into a BRTHL, searching for dragons. If it sounded like the beginning of a bad joke, perhaps it was. In any case, the hunt for the Dungeeter's patron had begun in earnest now at Godwin's request, and it fell to him now to see things through one way or another. As far as searching for a traitor went, one wouldn't think to find the assailant or any patron lurking in such an establishment, let alone one like as this. He'd come here expecting harsh, contrasting colors, but what he found proved to be anything but soft. That was the first word that came to mind when he swept open the door and barged inside. No one took any notice of him at first, not him, nor Albedo, or even sweet Raya. They were completely, utterly ignored. It didn't take long to see why, given the clientele. Heat rose to his cheeks when beheld the various men and women in states of undress. Momentarily embarrassed, he averted his gaze. The walls and carpets were a sweet, mellow yellow, while the very walls themselves seemed to shimmer with fettered light. No, not yellow, he realized, but gold. What was this place called again? The Queen's Caress. No points for ingenuity there. Regardless, it was very clean. At least, Naruto thought so. Not a speck of dirt anywhere. Well done. Then again, when you were born and raised in the sewers your entire life, all the world seemed clean by comparison. This place, meanwhile, was cleaner than most. The scent of perfume wafted across his nose, tempting his senses like a long-lost lover. Everywhere he looked, found his gaze lingering, despite his best efforts to avert it. A blonde woman dressed in the style of Queen Marika herself sashayed past him, wearing a gown of see-through silk, and against his will, he found his gaze drawn to her backside. Albedo hissed behind him. Relax. He patted her head. I wasn't trying to look, you know. There's a difference. Someone touched his hindquarters, and he SCK in a reflexive breath, startled by the sudden contact. An Omen. A velvety voice caressed his ears, soft as silk. We don't get many Omen around these parts. Or any at all, really. Another added. Didn't know they could be so handsome. He caught sight of a redhead with flowing curls before. She vanished into the crush of people. That was his only warning before they were noticed. The rest assailed them. He studiously averted his gaze and stared at the ceiling, doing his best to tune the lot of them out, to no avail. Look at him, he's proper fit. And those horns look like a crown. Have you come to play with us, my prince? And he has princesses with him? Aren't the 3 of you a lovely couple? We'll give you a discount. Now it was Albedo's turn to sputter. Discount? Raya tilted her head. Couple? Albedo's pale face had grown increasingly red throughout the conversation. which made her dark lustrous hair and curved horns stick out all the more, the better to draw attention to her natural beauty. Naturally, said attention made her even more red, so on and on it went, to say nothing of her body and wings. If she hadn't lost her tail long ago, he was certain someone would have tried to grab it by now. Her dress only made matters worse for her. All white with gold sequins over her bosom, it left little to imagination. This was precisely why he dressed down before coming here, favoring a gray tunic embossed with hints of green and gold. Himself. Raya was dressed like, well, Raya. She liked her green dress, same as always. In truth, she didn't seem at all flustered. Was she really that pure? She'd insisted on coming here with the two of them. Reichard had even allowed it, while Godwin seemed amused by the notion. It's nothing she hasn't seen before, he'd said at the time. Be sure to ask about her mother. What did that imply, exactly? Nope, never mind. Ignorance was bliss. A hand caressed his face, catapulting him back to the present. Oh, look at him. He's proper handsome for an Omen. A moment of your time, dear prince. Surely you have some for us, Albedo absolutely hissed. May I kill them? The formless mother crooned in his head. Yes, please. No, he sighed, and delved a hand into his belt, withdrawing a pouch of runes. No murder. I'm looking for someone. He let runes jingle against one another for good measure, drawing all eyes directly to him. Several someones, really. One should be a maiden with pale hair and bright eyes, the other a man with dark hair and pallid skin, never far from her side. I'll pay good money, the ladies crooned in dark delight, cutting him off. He must mean the dragon siblings. Is he choosing them, then? Lucky. A redhead pointed toward the southern end of the room, near the stairs. Belatedly, he spied the young man and woman in question mercifully clothed unlike everyone else here, berating one of the patron, a bald corpulent roll of a man whose silk double and breeches seemed several sizes too small, and no amount of fanciful fashion could hide it. Of the duo maligning the poor fellow, one was of dark hair, the other white as snow. Neither seemed aware of them with the ruckus they were making. They were lost in their own little world, heedless to the rest, which worked out rather well for them. Thanks to that, he was able to get right behind them without even noticing. Tell us where the Dungeeter's patron is or I shall eat you, the girl snarled. And not in the good way, spirits. He could have fired a spell in their face, and they still wouldn't have noticed, so fixated were they upon their task. Belatedly he caught sight of their telltale golden eyes and quirked a brow. 10 runes says those are Lanseeks and Fortisacs. Albedo scoffed and ran a hand through her frazzled hair. No bet. Naruto seeked his tongue and paid the lady in question. Raya whined. Ah, but runes. Ignoring their byplay, Naruto shouldered his way forward and, carefully, tapped the woman on the shoulder. Not carefully enough, it seemed, because she rounded on him with a yelp and swung for the fences. A fist filled his vision, to which he nimbly ducked aside. Albedo, standing directly behind him, however, did not. Down she went with a bloody, eyes rolling back in her head. Raya yelped and caught her before she could fall and dash her head against a table, but even then it proved a near thing. So much so that Naruto immediately found himself pivoting about as he rose back to his feet, forced to ignore the plaint as he fled. His fingers hooked into a claw to grab Godwin's so-called friend by her wrist and reel her in like a fish. Right, there went any goodwill he might felt. You are Lanseeks, right? The pale-haired lass rounded on him. I am, one of it. Is this about the gur? You should tell your woman to be more careful. Naruto's temper twitched tenfold. Great, he stomped a foot so strong, every candle in the room winked out. Our mutual friend sent us. Fortisax slapped a hand to his own forehead. Oh, dear. Godwin, his sibling perked up, anger fading somewhat. Has he a message for us? Naruto nodded briskly. He does. Funny thing, though, so do I. And what might that be, Crunch? He decked the disguised dragon in the schnoz and sent her hurting through a wall and into a pillar. Naruto lowered his fist and spat as she hit the floor face first, out cold. That's my message, Raya whistled. Uo, she flew. 1,000 apologies for my sister. Fortisax pinched the bridge of his nose. But you shouldn't have done that. Why? Naruto barely spared him a glance. He only had eyes for Albedo. Taking her from Raya, he gingerly laid her down on a nearby couch and went to work healing her bloody nose despite the protest of the formless mother in his head. Way I see it, someone should have done something like that a long time ago. You're not wrong, but you'll see when she wakes up, he huffed. She gonna be angry? Angry? I think not. She'll demand a rematch, likely of a more physical nature. Raya tilted her head and made a questioning noise. Like wrestling, Naruto heaved a sigh. It's always the crazy ones. How little he knew. Rani heaved a sneeze. That churl better not be thinking about me. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.